Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you. Thank you for joining us. I want, first of all, my own team to settle down. Lavoni, you want to take a seat as well? Kiran, why don't you come here so that you're looking nice and pretty? We can see you. And Gitika, can we project our speakers on the screen? The ones who are already here. And then we can start. Hi, hi, hi. Oh, we have a number of our guests joining us as well. Please come in. Good afternoon, good evening. Please come in. Welcome, welcome. Hi, Prerna. Please, Prerna, come join us up front. Hi. Hello, hello. Okay, great. So we have an audience of around 45 people ready. Everybody is on time. This is unprecedented that we're actually starting on time. And hi, Akriti. So nice to have you with us as well. I hope you can hear us. And
Thank you so much. Glad to be here.
thank you, Akriti. So wonderful. And I'm going to actually move to that side of the room because I've been told that that's where the camera can. So wonderful. So a very warm welcome to the launch of the Gender Primer for Indian and actually South Asian enterprises. And, we've spent the last 2.5 years actually preparing this gender primer. And it's so glad to have ICRW with us today, who have been, our peer reviewers with this primer and telling us, okay, no, you must think of this and that too. So, it's really been great to have everybody in this room. My team is here, and the authors of the report, myself and Kiran and Laboni, we're all here. But the motivation to do this and why at Nikore Associates we actually veered from, I would say, our comfort zone of actually working with governments. That's what we do. And we work with a lot of NGOs as well. We work with community-based organizations. But this was the first time that we felt that if we're working on women at the workplace, and if we're looking at the issue of why are women not participating in the workforce, especially in the urban, educated, categories of people, then we have to look at the corporate sector. We can't be people who don't understand the private sector. And that's what motivated us to take up this research. And as everything that we do, we went from a research perspective rather than a practitioner perspective on this primer. Our logic was the diversity, equity, and inclusion space in India today lacks research, lacks an industry standardization, lacks a, chronicling of the efforts. And we wanted to be the ones to come in and do that. And that's exactly what we've been doing for the last 2 years. And with our research of the last 2 years, we've actually managed to come out with a number of conclusions, findings, everything that Laboni and Kiran will take you through today. But just a few things I want to highlight in my opening address, which I found very interesting. What I found very interesting when we looked at the data, for example, for Nifty 50 companies, was that there's a huge movement towards compliance. Companies are very happy to say, yes, we have to provide this maternity leave because that's required by the law, or set up an ICC because, again, that's required by the law. But we're not seeing those softer measures like peer support networks for young parents, especially young mothers. We're not seeing those new measures, innovative measures like, for example, training programs for leadership. And of course, now there is a movement towards coming up with creches which are on site. But how many companies are actually able to do it? And then there is the other side, which is the company perspective. And the company perspective is not coming out in any of these conversations, discussions, that yes, you're putting in all of these compliances, but how do we actually meet these compliances? And this is much, much harder for startups, much, much harder for MSMEs, which are huge employers. So therefore, I think for all of us, there are very, very important questions that we can address today through this primer. And our aim and objective here is to, of course, start a conversation, but approach it with a research point of view, with a research lens to see what works, why something which doesn't work, why is it not working, and then how can we improve the efficiencies. So with that, I'd like to invite Kiran and Laboni. Kiran, maybe you can start and then Laboni can take on the presentation. Thank you so much for being here today. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, everybody. Thank you for joining us today and everybody who is joining us virtually. So as Mithali mentioned, I'm an HR practitioner. And that was the part where I jumped in when Mithali told me about her idea and said, okay, this is fabulous. This is something that we definitely need. What can we really do about it? So we looked at it from a research lens and how do we make it put something together that corporations, organizations, regardless of where they are placed in their journey, can pick it up and actually make progress. So that was what we wanted to do, something that can actually help bring that change. Some of the things that we did make sure got factored in was how do we bring about these inclusive policies from an employee life cycle perspective, not just knee-jerk initiatives that come in and they'll take the limelight, but from an ongoing sustainable practice, how do we build that so that it's part of the way we design policies, it's part of the way that these policies get implemented. And a critical factor to that we decided to bring in was metrics around that. How do you really measure those? Now, as Mithali spoke about, there's not much data in this field, especially in organizations, corporate sectors. We don't have that kind of data. So our attempt is also to spark conversations and over a period of time, actually build that database and insight that's actually going to tell us that how are we doing on these policies? Are they really designed for what we want them to really achieve? So those are some of the things, that we worked on to bring this to you. And we hope and we wish that every organization, no matter where they are in their journey, can pick it up and leverage it for whatever their agenda is or whatever the focus area is for the moment. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Laboni to run us through the primer in details for today. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Mitali. Thank you so much, Kiran. And I won't repeat what they said because they already covered a lot of ground. What I'll do is I'll take you through the tactical perspectives, tactical aspects of the primer and what we have done. So one big thing that's definitely there is that what we want to also acknowledge is that this primer is not the be all end all to all DEI problems. We don't mean it to be a be all end all to all DEI problems. We think this could be a possible entry point through which you as firms could explore DI practices. You could assess your own practices and you could then see where and how we should improve. So this is just a beginning, definitely not the end. So with that, I'll just quickly take you through what we plan to cover in the next 10 minutes. First is we'll go briefly take you through why we've worked on the primer. So that covers aspects of COVID-19 and the exacerbated impact it had on women in urban India. Second is DEI, like Mitali also mentioned, DEI is an increasing priority. Of course, right now it's driven by compliance, but it is nevertheless an increasing priority among firms. What are the key trends? And lastly, what are the 4 key principles to build more gender equitable workplaces? That's also something we've touched upon in one of our recent blogs. Feel free to check that out as well. Second is the gender primer. We'll share an overview of the primer. We won't go too much into detail, but just a broad perspective on what we've covered. The 5-stage gender inclusivity action framework has 5 different stages, and I'll take you through the broad overview of them. And lastly, again, like I said, it's not supposed to be a be all and all, and we'll tell you why it's not. So a couple of reflections on the primer and what we plan with the primer, the way forward with the primer with your help. So with that being said, I'll pass it on to Avantika, who's our data wizard, who's done a lot of work on this, and she'll cover the first section. Over to you, Avantika.
Thank you, Labuni. Can you hear me?
Yes.
All right. Can you move to the next slide, please? So here I would like to explain to you why the primer. So since March 2020, with the advent of the pandemic, of course, there have been countless people who have had to face major illnesses and loss of lives. And this issue deeply permeated the health sector. But unfortunately, it was not just limited to the health sector and permeated to the social and economic spheres of society. And in context of urban India, it was women who suffered the brunt of it. So to highlight some of the major effects of the pandemic on urban women in India. So first of all, it led to massive job and income losses among urban women. And as you can see, that female labor force contracted by 5.1 million between Jan 20 and Jan 22. Secondly, there was an increase in unpaid care work. So because of closures of creches and of lack of access to house help, most women reported that they had to face an increase in the burden of unpaid domestic work. And Nikore Associates has actually done a study on this, which also stated that this burden of housework was not proportionate to gender, and it was women who had most of the brunt of it. Thirdly, there was also reports which highlighted that there was a 131% increase in domestic violence complaints in May 2020, which implied that due to lack of mobility, women were facing more domestic violence during this period. And this is also related to my 4th point, which is increase in mobility restrictions, wherein most women, more than half of the proportion surveyed, reported that they could not go to the market alone, which deeply restricted their movement. 5th, this is quite important and is very dependent on the education field. So here it was surveyed that in India, more women, only 25% of adult women owned a smartphone as opposed to 41% of adult men, which deeply restricts their access to educational opportunities and work opportunities. And lastly, reports also highlighted issues at the workplace, and 61% of 500 Indian women surveyed felt less optimistic about their career prospects today than before the pandemic. Keeping this context in mind, let's just move to the next slide. So this is the study that Mitali mentioned in her introduction about the study that we had done where we assess the policies that are being carried out by Nifty 50 companies. So we noticed that the traditional policies, which are mandated by the government, have been being observed properly. As you can see in the graph, that 80 to 100% of companies were observing these traditional policies related to maternity benefits, creation of sexual harassment cell, and also implementing diversity hiring programs. However, this was only limited to these traditional initiatives. And as we were looking at the more innovative policies that could have been implemented, we noticed that more companies are now implementing gender sensitization trainings in the workforce, which is 16% of companies. However, there was a lack in the number of companies which provided gender neutral leave, paternity leave, flexible working hours, retention programs, and crash facilities. So I believe that these are areas where organizations can improve to achieve their DEI goals. Next slide, please. This is referring to the 4 principles that we mentioned before. So at Nikore Associates, we build on these 4 principles, which can be used by organizations to build more gender equitable workplaces. So first of all is to listen to employees, especially women. And this can be done through active engagement with employees through forums, surveys, town halls, meetings, to identify all of these policy gaps and actually zero in on employee needs. Secondly, data-driven DEI, as aforementioned, there is a lack of data in this particular sphere, but we believe that regular data collection can help companies measure and assess the effectiveness of these DEI policies, which can also result in better outcomes for these diversity goals. Thirdly, we are emphasizing on a life cycle approach. So diversity goals should not be limited to just women entering inside the organization. They should be represented through all levels of seniority in a workforce. Therefore, we need to build an employee life cycle which can help build a pipeline of women at various levels of seniority. Lastly, Nikore Associates has come up with a 5-stage gender inclusivity framework for implementation, wherein organizations can use this framework to maximize value for money and increase their policy effectiveness. So over to you, Laboni, to explain our framework.
Great, thank you so much. Thanks, Avantika. So we'll just quickly go through the 5 stages that I spoke about in the beginning. So the 5 stages consist of all the key stages we think you should be following while framing policies. So usually what you'll see when we talk about policy analysis, you'll just see policy analysis. But what we've done is we've broken down the entire chain here. And I think this is a fantastic framework for, which is agnostic of sectors. But what we've done is we've contextualized this for more like a gendered perspective. So the first stage here is baseline analysis and gender inclusivity categorization. You can go to the next slide. Here what we do is we throw some questions at you, which are primary fundamental questions, which helps you assess where you are in terms of gender inclusivity in those categories, right? For example, what is the share of leadership positions? What is the share of women in the leadership positions in your firm? Is that less than 30%? Is it 30 to 50%? Is that more than 50%? So that way you categorize yourself as a basic firm, as an intermediate firm, and as an advanced firm. And your goal should be to move from basic to intermediate to advanced, right? So you'll see on the right-hand side, left-hand side, we've listed a couple of questions. I'm not going into too much detail here, but again, happy to discuss any questions you think. The next stage here is the pre-facto policy formulation. So before you even have your policy, right, what are the key questions you should be asking of your policy? Who is going to be benefiting from this policy? What's the scope of this, right? And what's the intended effect you want to have? After that, you devise your policy and then you put it through a process which we term as a third stage. Can we go to the next slide? The third stage is policy analysis. Now, once you have your policy with you, what are the implicit costs? Now, you can do your economic benefits, cost benefits analysis, but what are the implicit costs? What are the linkages to your existing policy? What will happen to your existing policy when you get this policy in place? And what does that policy lead to any externality? Is there anything unintended that's happening? So oftentimes what happens is that there is a very linear financial analysis that gets done, but we want you to ask these questions when you frame your policy, so that you consider the very 4 principles that Mitali had also mentioned initially into your policy framework, including the voices of your employees, especially women. The next stage here, once you've analyzed your policy, is that this is also something that's often missing from a lot of frameworks. You do a pilot before full-fledgedly implementing your policy. You do a pilot in some small targeted areas, and you understand now how are people reacting to this pilot. Is there an impact that is the intended effect being achieved? Is there something else I'm missing out, other key gaps? For that, after the pilot, we go to the last stage. Can we go to the next slide? The last stage, which is post facto policy impact evaluation. So once you've done your pilot, what has the impact been? Have you achieved your impact outcomes? If you haven't, what are the gaps, right? So what are the tweaks and changes you can make to make it more robust, and then do a full scale implementation? So that's the 5 stages that we've broken down the process into. So again, that's the overview here. And while making this framework, while working on this, in our discussions, like Kiran mentioned, there were a lot of challenges we faced, which I think is worthy of mentioning, reiterating again. So for that, I'll just quickly take you to the last slide. Basically, like Mitali also mentioned, often what happens is that there is a lack of data. Now, we don't know, maybe companies are collecting it, but it's not available for analysis, or maybe firms are not collecting it, in which case they should. Existing tools, it's not like this is the first tool, first of its kind. Well, it is, but the existing tools in place are pretty theoretical. It's long, 80, 100 pages of documents, which will also not often be application friendly. So our goal here was to make something more application friendly that helps you ask these questions of yourself and then make the right choices. And lastly, the way forward here, what we plan to do is we definitely aim, which is why we're here today, we would definitely aim to collect data, we aim to collect feedback, we want to keep on refining the primer, and then develop further versions of the primer. And then lastly, right now, our primer is very internal focused. Maybe once we develop more versions, once we have more collaborators, once we have more information in the sector, we can make it for different industry verticals. For example, if you want to make grants, if you want to make investments, what are the key DI perspectives you should be looking for in your grantees, in your prospective investees? So there's the playing field is pretty wide and pretty open right now. What we want to do is we want to get the conversation started. We want to get the information flow started, and then get your help to actually take this to completion. Thank you.
Thanks, Lavoni. I think this was brilliant, and we've all got a very good perspective, or at least an introductory perspective of what all we've got in the primer. So without further ado, I'd like to invite Akriti Chopra, the co-founder of Zomato and one of our first guests in the round table. And we'll open it up. And Akriti, we'd love to hear your perspective, your reflections, and your experiences.
Sure. Thank you so much, Mitali. And thank you for inviting me here. I'm glad to be part of this forum. And congratulations to the Nikore Associates team for devising this framework. As I was walking through it, it's interesting to see that any initiative or business launch that we think of as well, you need a guidance, and you need to have the right evaluation metrics to measure impact and success. And what this framework seems to be doing is incorporating both of those very well. So congratulations for devising this. Now at Zomato, and I've been here 10 years, while we don't have a 5-stage inclusivity framework yet, we strongly believe in the other 3 principles that you talked about. And in addition to that, I think the most important one, which Mitali, you mentioned as well, was that organizations end up just meeting a baseline from a compliance point of view, but as an organization, we have always held that we're going to uphold ourselves to a much higher standard, and that commitment is also reflected through some of our policies, which have been designed to cater to inclusion. I'll talk about a few of them over the next few minutes. The first one that we introduced was period leaves in June of 2020. Now, this was met with a fair bit of debate when we introduced it. But essentially, the policy is that all women and transgender employees of Zomato can avail up to 10 days of period leaves in a year. Now, we're an equal opportunity organization, but having said that, we understand that men and women have different biological realities, and hence might need additional support to ensure that biology does not interfere with them being able to fully utilize the opportunities available to them. And there should not be any shame or stigma attached to taking time off because of menstrual discomfort. And we introduced this policy, and it's been heartening to see that now there are about 25% women who do end up taking these leaves every month, and this number has increased since we launched this policy by a couple of percentage points every month. Of course, I mean it took some time to get everybody accustomed to it, and I'm not saying that the battle is won here, but there are a few things that we did in order to make this successful, and I'll talk about that towards the later part of this as to what our learnings have been. So this was, I think, one of the key policies that we introduced. I think the second one, which has had some impact in Zomato and the way sort of in gender inclusion has happened in Zomato is that we introduced a gender neutral parental leave in January 2019. Now, the Maternity Benefits Act requires us to grant a 6-month leave for women only, but we decided to extend this to fathers as well. And in fact, our policy also extends to non-birthing parents and same-sex partners in cases of surrogacy or adoption. Now, since we introduced this policy, a lot of men have taken it. And over a period of time, what we've seen is now that on an average, men end up taking about 140 days of parental leaves, and which is great to see, because that's meeting the objective with which we had introduced this policy, right? The idea was that men also start taking on an active role in the primary care of children, and it's not dependent only on the mothers, right? So that's another policy that we think has made an impact and made a difference to at least employees at Zomato. Apart from this, right, as an organization, we're very, very committed to the overall wellness of our employees. So Zomans, as we call ourselves, we have access to an in-house wellness team of mental health professionals, as well as fitness trainers. And our medical insurance also extends to spouses, live-in partners, same gender partners as well. Now, we set up our in-house wellness team, the mental health professionals, in March of 2019. And while it initially started with just workshops for different teams, I think right now, over since 3 years of setting up this team, we actually conduct almost 12% of our employees have regular counseling sessions with our wellness team. And it's great to see that when we launched it, there was a lot of push from the wellness team to managers to reach out, from the HR side to reach out to employees and get them accustomed to the idea of reaching out and seeking professional mental health. But over the last few months, we've been seeing an increased number of employees reaching out voluntarily. So it's also indicative of the fact that over a period of time, the taboo has been reducing, and which is what I think these initiatives have been directed towards.
Right.
Yeah. So apart from this, right, I think one thing I'd like to also call out from the primer, which stuck out, is establishing sort of the baseline, right? Like how many, what is the percentage of women in leadership is one of the key questions to ask. And while the battle is nowhere won at Zomato. As a listed company, our board has an equal representation of men and women at 4 each. Our CXOs and business and function heads have about a 33% representation of women, but the number in mid-senior leadership is lesser than that. But it's because that we have a strong representation for women. A lot of the policies have also been conceptualized by women, but I strongly believe that none of this would have still been possible if the male leadership in our organization did not champion these policies. And Dipinder, Mohit, who are our co-founders, they have been strong supporters of these initiatives.
Right. Thank you so much, Akriti. I think this was really enlightening to everyone in the room. And we really appreciate your time today for sharing this with us.
No,
And
my pleasure.
thank you. Thank you so much. And thank you also for appreciating our work, on the primer. It's really good to see that you went through, some of these points that we've put across. And we really appreciate your, time and attention to that. So with that,
No,
I'd
thank
like to
you.
invite, thank you. And with that, I'd like to invite Srimati ma'am. We've known each other for a very long time, and I'm so happy to see you here today. And you are currently Corporate Vice President and Head of New Vistas at HCL Technologies. So we'd love to hear from your experience. And you've been, one of the inspirations for me to do this. So really appreciate that and, welcome you.
Thank you, Mitali. I think it's fantastic that you brought a primer, much needed. Gender inclusion will be a subject that probably people will speak even after 100 years, Akriti, whether we like it or not, because this is anyway going to continue because we'll continue to be minority in the workforce. Maybe we need more of Akritis there, then it might probably change the tables. But until then, we will continue to be the highlight of highlight in the organization as minorities. Various reasons. Today, you must be very interested to know that I got a position called the Principal Diversity Officer way back in Infosys. When this position came to me, I went up and said, what do you mean? I mean, why am I even put into a women inclusivity network? I come from sales background and business background. And then the founder of the organization, he just laughed and he told me, that's exactly because you're asking such questions. We do need women who have not experienced this to be part of this team and manage it. One is sensitivity, the second is inclusivity, and the third angle is the neutrality that Akriti brought. I would want to explore some of these things and tell you what will not work, because I think I want to wear that hat of, wear that black hat, and where you should not sweat and put your lot of energy. Okay. The first and foremost, probably one thing that in the primer that has come very strongly is to also promote the gender networks, but don't sweat over the networks, because end of the day it seems to be more an HR accountability, and for somebody like Akriti to put it in the budgets and spend, but women don't turn up. In most of the forums I've seen, whether it's a small company or large company, finally we call the HR folks, the employee partner HR. And frantically we'll tell them, what the hell, yeah? I mean, we are spending money and nobody's coming. Where's my ROI for the $50,000 I've put into this engagement? We've got a great leader from the customer to come and speak. Where are they? And people are running in the ground and actually the men are coming into the room saying, hey, I'm very curious to know what's happening in this room. But the girls are not turning up. So I think in the last 20 years, India has spent a lot on these forums. So Mitali, I'm glad that you didn't put that as a major thing, which I think is most important for the sensitive and inclusive. So don't spend on networks. Lean-in doesn't come through networks. Lean-in comes naturally, even if you find a buddy at work whom you can, kind of use as a sounding board. The second is the measurement of success. The measurement of success need not be the percentage of women in the workforce. We should just move away from that. It's like a parliament. We say, oh, 33% women. So what? Yeah, only 1% of the women in the parliament even speaks up. What happens to the 32%? You know, they're sitting somewhere there, and nobody even looks at them when they get up and talk, right? And they're only needed to vote. So I think if you have a, we are not about quorum, but it's about where this 33% is resting. So I remember bringing a different angle to this, Mitali, which I think might benefit most of you in this room. Is I asked all my male leaders, do you have a direct reportee who's a woman? Look at your organization. Forget about what percentage of women do you have. Look at your organization. Do you have one direct reportee who's a woman? Why is it you don't have? How can you go and advocate that you need more women to all your team members when you don't have a woman? Right? And then they say, oh, we have been constantly searching. I said, how long? You're all going to retire and you're still saying you can't search. I mean, I don't understand, right? So I think sometimes confronting what is real and practical would be a lot easier than asking them to measure the impact in some other way. That's the second thing, you know, you should just tell them, what are you doing? You have a woman, right? A leader in your team. The third, I think we should also focus a lot more is do not ask for any more business cases. Do you need women? Do I have to spend this money? Will it going to bring any impact? Change takes a long time, and for large organizations or small organizations, and the change is inevitable. The impact is still going to take that much long to bring in. So never ask your CFO to come to you and say, hey, can I get an ROI for the investment I'm making on all these gender activities? It is a CFO mandate not to question when it comes to gender sensitive, inclusive, or neutral activities. I think that is something we should ask for. The fourth important point, which should not be, is like Akriti said, we should have more business leaders accountable. Unfortunately, most of the organization becomes an HR mandate. How can HR be responsible for women inclusion? HR can only enable. They're not even decision makers. They don't even own budgets. And then we make HR accountable for running the diversity programs. In my view, the accountability should be with the business. We need diversity champions in the business and not in the HR. I don't think I'm trying to talk a little negative about this, but I'm just saying we can only enable. HR should enable, but the business should own. Budgets should be owned by the business, but and also the what should go into the KPPs must be owned in the business. I have one final thing about the gender neutrality, Mitali, and I think it's very important for the group to know. I really like the concept of neutrality. The more the policies are neutral, the change comes very fast. Way back in 2003, I'm talking about in the Bangalore, in the electronic city, we decided to set up a daycare. And when I went and rolled up my sleeves and I got it, I remember one of the very senior leaders from the CFO team asking me, so Srimati, so women are going to get benefited by this program. So I smiled and said, just wait and see who will be my first, first customer. The first customer happened to be a father, a male employee of the company, who wanted to be kind to his wife and decided that he will use the company setup and brought his daughter to the daycare. So we talk about unconscious biases, but then it's important to put neutrality into the practice to break. So I would advocate a lot of policies which are a lot more gender agnostic, more than saying neutral, agnostic, and keep pushing on that, because you'll find a lot of male champions coming automatically. So my 4 points, my 4 cents.
Thank you. And I think that is such a good insight, because and such a heartening story to end your point with, because this is exactly what we need. I mean, this is already we are starting to see a pattern emerge with the gender neutral parental leave and gender neutral crashes. Of course, crashes are by definition gender neutral. It's just that we attach agenda to them. So with that, I'd like to now invite Dr. Prerna Kumar, Senior Technical Specialist from the International ICRW, and she can take us through her impressions of the primer. Of course, I have to share that she was one of my seniors at the LSC when I was just a student. And so I'm very, very excited to see her after almost a decade today in person here in the room. So Prerna, over to you. Can we have a mic for Prerna?
Thank you. I have the mic, Mithali, and lovely to see you indeed. Thank you for this opportunity. And I must say that what a great start. Post-COVID, I think it's a great start to have a gender primer in place to really get the conversation started. And I think that's the entire purpose. How do we even get that conversation started with organizations who don't see it as a problem at all, who don't even acknowledge that there is an issue that they need to really address. And I think one of the points that you made, and that's what I'm going to hold on to for a bit, is the fact that MSMEs are a big employer in this country. And interestingly, they are the ones who are not talking about it at all. They neither have the wherewithal, and when I say wherewithal, it implies everything from policy to the mindset to even, just the sense of what to do if we have to go that route. And I think that way the primer comes in very, very handy to really get them started. When I was looking through the primer, I think, of course, we have reviewed it together and we've kind of shared our feedback. But one of the things that also I would say we would possibly in the next phase of the primer could add is the fact that we just need not look at women in leadership, but we also need to look at where are women within the organization, which departments. It's very interesting that there are big brands that ICRW works with, and we realize that women continue to be at the bottom of the supply chain. Despite the fact that they have workplace programs, despite the fact that they have huge investments, women still continue to be part of the, essentially the floor. And women are, while you would find a few stories of change, we still don't see women in several of the departments which are considered hazardous for women. And it's very interesting how we associate certain gendered aspects or attributes rather with work. We don't want to see women in anything which is very technical, or which is considered unsafe, or which is considered hazardous, because we understand that women need to be protected. And this I find very, very fascinating because no one questions that. No one says that why is it that in a factory, a woman cannot work at a boiler? Who stops her from doing that? But no, we want to protect our women. So I think one other point that I want to make with this is that we really need to see, while we're trying to make policies that support women, we should not really become protectionist in our approach. And this is, again, something that, we've seen often organizations doing. Oh, we need to be generous. Oh, we need to be protective of women. You don't need to be protective of women. You need to provide them the opportunity to be able to do things that they are capable of doing. The other thing that we've realized time and again with our work at ICRW, both with private sector as well as because we work with communities directly, is the fact that even when you want women, where is the pipeline? Who's training them? Are the industries really investing in training women for a pipeline that then feeds into these positions which we want to fill across these departments, across the layers, and we want to continue to have women in those positions? Interestingly, from a community perspective, women are not supposed to be working, right? They're only supposed to be working when there's a dire need, when the family doesn't have anyone to support. Okay, then of course, the responsibility is that of the woman. But other than that, what's the need? You might have a degree, but you have such a great husband. Why do you need to work? You have a car, you have a house. What's the need to work? And that is what we need to break. I'm sure, I mean, I have seen some of your blogs which talk about it, that how there are so many women who have the degrees, who have the technical expertise, but they still are not able to join the workforce. We have also seen that women are not able to join the workforce, and especially, when I'm talking about women who can, it's not just the ones who come out of a business school or a management school or engineering college, but even ITIs. Something as simple as an ITI, which could possibly feed into a MSME kind of a setup. When you train these girls, they're not able to sustain themselves within those organizations. We have seen programs failing simply because they do not have the soft skill, they do not have the understanding, they do not have the life skill to be able to negotiate with their male colleagues who understand being masculine as being aggressive. And that leads me to my next point, which is that just looking at policies will not alone help us, because a lot of norms also seep into the workplaces, and these are informal norms. How often do we see decisions being taken on a smoke break among the boys' club, so to say, right? And where are the women? Women might smoke. I'm not saying that women don't smoke, but are they part of the conversations which happen informally and which then influence the decision making? Or for instance, if there's an assertive woman leader, there's just so much trouble everyone finds to deal with it, because that is seen as a masculine attribute, rather than understanding that she is just a leader and assertion is part of leadership, or part of just having good communication skills. But again, the problem is that our own understanding is so normative, and our own understanding of what a man or what a woman should look like or should behave like is so gendered that we're not able to accept women leaders. And I think one very good point that Srimati ji made was that let's have, of course, gender agnostic policies, very, very required. But I think it's also very important to understand that there could be some very specific needs of, and when I'm talking gender, I need to move beyond the binary. There could be very specific needs of not just women, but other genders as well. I'm just going to wrap up there and happy to take questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Prerna. And I think, you made such a valid point, and that's exactly coming out in, the approaches of the companies who've spoken so far, like Zomato is explicitly recognizing that, women have a biological need, and therefore, the need for a period leave was felt by the organization, and Zomato was able to implement, afford, and have this roll out, but maybe an MSME is not able to, and that how can they actually roll out these kind of programs? And I think this is very interesting. So with that, we will now move to Ms. Mansa Priya Vasudevan, the Adolescent and Youth Development Specialist from UNICEF. And we're so excited to have UNICEF with us today, because it's the young women, who are going to move into private sector. So Mansa, please enlighten us, what are the aspirations, and how can a more diverse workforce actually meet these aspirations of young women?
Thank you. I think, I'm really glad to be going after Prerna, who is also from a similar sector. So she's opened up some pertinent conversations that I can build upon. I think one of the important things that I'm here representing UNICEF's Adolescent and Youth Division, but I'm also representing a specific global program called YUVA, or Generation Unlimited, that we've launched in 2019. And fortunately for us, actually, that has really expanded UNICEF's focus to the young people between 18 and 29. So we work with that entire spectrum of young people. And, very pertinently to today's discussion, we are looking at that entire adolescence to adulthood transition, the learning to skilling to employability and workforce transition. That's exactly the median where we're really working. That is the pipeline that we're really trying to strengthen. And within that pipeline, there is 1,000 slips between the cup and the lip. And so actually, I do believe, from my standpoint, champions at every level of workforce is absolutely essential, including in the HR space. I mean, absolutely, absolutely essential, because they are at every point. There are gatekeepers who can become enablers, who can bat as allies, and that is really a big, from our standpoint, that's a big area where we would like to advocate with companies on. And we work specifically on the adolescence to adulthood transition. So we're looking right from mobilization and community sensitization drives to upskilling young people, especially on 21st century and industry agnostic leadership skills, which include soft skills or power skills that are required to really survive and thrive in the workspace and to be ready for or resilient for your future of work. We work on internships, we work on apprenticeships, we work on job applications, on strengthening all genders job applications with specific focus on women. But we're also looking at how we can improve screening processes at the agency end, right? Because a lot of the time the agency is operating on norms that are, like Prerna pointed out, invisible societal norms that are playing, so that are outside of the list of parameters, however gender sensitive those parameters may be, in really shortlisting for selection. And then there is the entire, and massive problem of sustainability in the workforce. And I think for sustainability in the workforce, like I pointed out, I mean, that you need gender champions at every level, for which sensitization drives cannot be currently, even within UN systems, we are struggling to, really advance the cadence at which, or the frequency at which these sensitization trainings are taking place. One-shot trainings absolutely go a very short way in fulfilling social and behavioral change of the level that we're thinking through, right? Even within our conversation, we are talking about a gender primer, but our conversation swings between binary and gender transformative, right? And we are supposedly the gender advocates who are the more converted bunch. So I do think it's a massive exercise we have, especially when laying out those parameters. How can we be inclusive in those parameters? And we're looking at, and typically, and this is a big problem, the persona of a woman of today. Who is the persona who is in front of us when we're constructing these policies? Is a huge question we need to ask ourselves. And it is not an assumed persona that we should go with, even as women, even if we are part of the policy development process. Are we listening and identifying the diverse range of gender personas who are marginalized categories that we need to be building policy for? And this may not just be women. This may be, young men coming from underserved communities who are not confident with communication capabilities. Young men who are struggling to accept women as leaders are part of the problem. And at the induction stage, are these parameters being factored in as well? Are our personas, our employee personas diverse enough to really encapsulate the reality that is today? Are we looking at young women who are okay with mobility? Like Prerna pointed out, today's young woman may not, and I mean, there may be young women that still, rely on certain essentialist, challenges, but there may be women that are ready to break away from them. Are we considering those personas is an important thing we need to ask. And I really, I don't want to take up too much time, but I think the need of the hour is absolutely to go beyond maternity leaves and essentialist, protectionist gender policies that assume archaic women and gender personas, to really look at gender transformativeness. And I think some of the examples that the Zomato co-founder started us out with are fabulous examples, but how can we really walk that mile? There is no real way except to continuously dialogue and identify a diverse range of personas that we're really building policy for with them. So if we don't know enough about their reality, involve them in the policy, in vetting that policy, in making sure that it actually speaks to them. And are we, apart from policy level change and apart from a baseline and endline study, are we looking at the environment and enabling environment factors that impede young women from continuing to sustain in the workforce? And how is our policy addressing that? Is something we should possibly look at. Yeah, I think I'll pause there. There's there's unpacking that needs to be done, and hopefully over the course of dialogue we will.
Thank you, Mansa. This is so enlightening, and I won't take too much time right now because I know Elsa has a bit of a time. She has to leave at 6. So Elsa, calling you on. You are the founder of Red Dot Foundation, but you also do so many other amazing things. So please enlighten us, and also specifically love for you to talk about the mobility aspect, because that is one of our major barriers for women's participation in the workforce.
Well, thank you, first of all, for having me, and congratulations on the gender primer. I believe we need more conversations like that. I resonate with all that's been said so far. I want to leave you with this thought that, first of all, look around and see who's missing in the room. Because whenever you have a title called gender, you can see who's in the majority out there. And why should that be? When we are talking about gender neutral policies or gender agnostic policies, why are the majority missing when we are having these conversations? So that means there's something wrong. And true to our clan and our tribe, we will always carry others with us, right? That's why we want neutrality in the policies and agnostic policies, so that everyone benefits, because we know that everyone benefits. We know that gender equality is good for everyone. But what does it take to make the other 50% believe in it? Today, they hate the word feminist. They think feminist means feminine, and they don't see it as equality. If you talk about gender equality, like the previous speaker, they assume the binary, and they again lump it, for women. So who's missing in the room, and why aren't they here to hear what we have to say, and why don't they believe in it? And I think that's the problem, because if you want to move the needle, it takes investment and intention. So there's no intention to really be here or listen to what is going on, and there's tokenism everywhere. And like the Zomato co-founder said, their policies were revolutionary and successful. It's because the male co-founders believed in it. It was dreamed up by the women, I think, but they supported it fully. And that's what we need, because no matter what we say, current policies are designed for men. And if you have to include other people into it, it will need investment. And that investment must not be questioned. But of course, we live in a dog-eat-dog world, and the bottom line does matter. And so you will always have to explain to your CFO, much as we want to say that it's not true. Now, my work is specifically on sexual and gender-based violence prevention. And again, you can't talk about it without talking about patriarchy and the socio-cultural aspect, which promotes this violence in so many ways. So a large part of our work is about challenging the gender norms, which could be harmful, the stereotypes, which could be harmful, and helping people to think in a more inclusive manner. And that requires education. Unfortunately, our generation did not have it when we were growing up, and we can't leave it to chance that we were brought up in a family that did believe in, equality, because maybe we are less than 1%, to be very honest. So we have to invest parallelly, not only in policies, but also in education at all levels. I think one of the earlier speakers also said that. I sit on several committees, investigation committees for companies, and I've seen a very worrying trend that women report their incidents when they leave, when they are resigning. And what does that say? We have an act that allows for remedies in a manner that you can avail of, which is non-criminal. It's a civil act, and it also allows for mediation. Yet, why is it that women feel comfortable reporting their incident when they are resigning? That says a lot about your company's organization culture and your inclusive policies. So we need to address that on an immediate footing. And then, do we only do it for compliance, or do we really believe it? And if we really believe it, how are we speaking on panels that are only male panels? How are we investing in only male panels? How can we shamelessly put full page ads in the Economic Times and the Times of India? And when you pay that kind of money, that means you've invested in it, right? So that is totally not in resonance with what you're otherwise saying you believe in. So I feel we really have to stop this nonsense of just checking the boxes, but really walking our talk.
Absolutely.
And that's one of the reasons why, we also came up with this book, She Is, and my podcast, Believe, to amplify and showcase many, many women. And again, women must make space for more women. It's the same women all the time, occupying the space. There are so many women. What are we doing for that pipeline that we are talking about? Can we start making space? There's enough and more opportunities, ladies. So just let's show the men that there's a different kind of leadership, and let's not set ourselves up for failure, because those very few women at the top, when they fail because they are trying to emulate their male colleagues and kind of copying their behavior, when they fail, they carry the burden that all women leaders then fail. So let's show them the different leadership styles that are possible and the different alternatives that are possible, that will be beneficial to all, that will have a positive influence on the bottom line.
Absolutely.
About mobility, before I leave, again, is it only okay to have a safe workspace? What about creating safe transport, safe public spaces, and providing providing a culture where that woman or that person can be at themselves when they're coming to work, at work, and then when they're going back. And I think that is something that we don't think of. We think of silos and, boundaries. Our responsibility is only here, but what about immediately outside the workforce, etc.? So there's a lot of work to do. In short, education is one, investment is one, holistic policies are another, challenging gender biases and harmful stereotypes is the other, and making space for each other is also, a critical need of the hour. I'm going to stop there.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Elsa. And thank you for creating She Is. Of course, I have to thank you for that. And thank you for joining us today. So I'll also now like to invite Salona Channa, who is the business manager, large corporates at Google India, to talk to us about her experiences. But this is not just at Google, right, Salona? This is across your 10-year career as a recipient of the diversity programs. They are all targeted at you. So how does it make you feel?
Yeah. So my view of gender diversity, which stems from my 10 years of corporate experience across 3 organizations. To summarize it, I feel it centers around 3 pillars: sensibility, structure, and sustainability. And before I delve further into that, I'd like to start with something that I really like about the gender primer, is that the tone it sort of sets in bringing out what we can do. It's a very positive note, because while there is enough and more need and conversation around what we are not doing, now I think we need to pivot to what we can do. So bringing out a few examples which helped me see what we can do around these 3 pillars. Sensibility is where we need to build in gender diversity and equality as a concept in our everyday lives as a part of what we do. At one of the organizations where I've worked, we used to have a 9 to 7 daycare for the children of all employees. And something that used to happen is that when a lot of people used to join the team or the organization, they used to be quite surprised and pleased at it, and ask my manager why they weren't aware of this earlier, right? And my manager always had the same reply, that it's essentially a hygiene factor. It's an essential service that should be there. We don't count it as a differentiator. And if you see a change because it isn't there at other organizations you've worked with, that's a problem at their end. And I think that really brings about the fact that all employees, it used to be an enabler for all employees, both all genders, right? And used to equip them and their spouses, whether at the same organization or at other organizations, to contribute equally to their work. Secondly, structure. So everything we do in our work lives, every project, every initiative that we're driving essentially has a project plan, it has metrics, it has targets. Why not diversity? Why is diversity, as someone mentioned previously, a knee-jerk reaction, sudden initiatives that come up, die down, then somebody brings them back again? So in another one of the organizations that I worked in, it's a core part of the key responsibilities and deliverables assessed in every performance cycle at each level. And the sort of difference that brings in the level of responsibility with which all employees own up to it really makes it a part of the culture. Thirdly, sustainability. So we do succession planning at every level. We do succession planning in businesses. We do succession planning at office. We need to start seeing these initiatives as succession planning so as to equip whatever hiring we've done to continue to become systemic, right? Which includes, and this is the third organization that I've worked with, which includes setting up a lot of resources to train, mentor, coach women to grow so that there is equity and not just equality. So that not only do they have access to equal opportunities, they are equipped to leverage them as well, right? And a holistic succession planning of roles that women currently are in at various leadership levels. And I truly feel that the gender primer helps put in, asks questions and put in metrics to develop a sensibility, gives a framework to suggest a structure for various organizations to adapt to if they don't have one, if they need guidance, as well as suggest long-lasting improvements which make it sustainable. So I feel it's actually a great initiative to take forward.
Thank you. It means a lot coming from somebody who's actually going to benefit from these policies and who has heard webinar after webinar. As Salona is a very good friend of mine, and she has told me this. She said, Mithali, today I have to go for another diversity webinar. So I think, it's great to know that hopefully with today's event and with the primer, we'll all be able to move forward from, the webinar approach towards doing something more concrete. And now we would like to welcome Jaspreet. Jaspreet Bakshi is a partner and HR leader for Marsh McLennan and also our sole male speaker, which puts a lot of, pressure on Jaspreet. So Kiran, thank you for, recommending that Jaspreet join us today. Jaspreet, if you have any, issues, you can take it up with Kiran later. So over to you, Jaspreet.
Geetika, thank you, and thank you, Kiran, and good evening, everyone. Good to be here. So I joined in late, but I think it was very interesting to hear some of the comments and the thoughts, and I'll probably share my thoughts from two perspectives, if that's okay. One, what shaped me up as an individual. So just a little background. Brought up by a single mother, army background. So that had a very, very profound impact on me. I'm also blessed today with two daughters. So four women that really are part of my life and then that really drive the whole construct of or the fabric of who I am. And that becomes a very, very important piece because when we're talking about inclusion, when we're talking about diversity, I think one important element is that it is not about organization, it is about homes, where it starts from. because that shapes our thinking, that shapes who we are, that also shapes a lot of things which manifest in the organization context, right? So that's something which is very, very important. And I feel that's the starting point, right? Are we really talking about the right inclusion? Are we really talking about things that matter in schools and colleges? Because it starts from there as well, right? And then comes the corporate part. Uh, I've been fortunate to work in couple of organizations where I've seen needle movement from just being a diversity policy to real inclusion. Right? I also don't disagree with what many of the speakers said, that there is a lot yet to be done. I think we've barely started on the journey, but there are 2-3 important elements that we should always keep in mind. One, when we are really talking about true inclusion, it's not just about a policy, it's not just about a framework, it's about the whole DNA and the culture of the organization, right? Why are we still in this age and time talking about policies that should be focused on women and women leaders? A policy is a policy, a leader is a leader, it is gender agnostic, right? If there's a fact that we're still discussing, that means that there is some journey that we need to cover. And this is the conversation we have when we are talking about succession planning, saying, oh, we need to be driven by a 40% mandate or a 45% mandate. And we say that, just the fact that we are starting the discussion with that note defies the whole purpose of what we're trying to achieve, right? So I think few things that we should always keep in mind, and I can probably talk a little bit about from my experiences. One, starting with a number or starting with the percentage defines the whole approach, what we're trying to do. It has to be all inclusive in every manner. It's not just about a facility that we are providing. It's not about just looking at the leadership development program. It's a holistic inclusion in every sense, right? That's one. Two, there is also an acknowledgement and a realization that last 2 years have changed the paradigm drastically, right? 3 years back, the conversation was very, very different. Today, the conversation is very different. And whatever we say, there is an honest acknowledgement that we have seen an attrition of almost 45%, especially for women colleagues. So as organizations, what can we do to really enable them to continue to work? What can we do to really enable them to continue to support their responsibilities, both at a work and a personal front? And at no point I'm saying that the responsibility is only for women. It's a equal responsibility, right? So gender agnostic in the true sense, right? I think the other important element that we need to keep in mind is, yes, there is still some gap in terms of providing equal playing field, if we call it, right? Can organizations be more mindful of what can they do and how can they do things differently? I think one of the earlier speakers spoke about, and it's a very valid point, it's not about an HR policy itself. It's about really believing in that philosophy day in, day out, and then trying to look at that. A very interesting conversation I had with someone in a different organization few months back about restarting crash facility when we were talking about the RTO. And then we were talking about creating the nursing rooms. And then we were talking about really looking at how do we provide transport to women colleagues who, let's say, are expecting parents, right? Expecting mothers. The first response is, just read, but we don't have the budget for that. Right? And this is a very senior leader who told me this. And that was the starting point, saying, that's where the penny drops. Saying, you keep talking about inclusion, but the first point that comes to your mind is we don't have budget for these 3 policies. Right? So I think there is still some progress that we need to make in terms of thinking, in terms of approach. But just the fact that we are coming together, just the fact that we're talking about it openly, I think there is definitely more possibilities that can be explored. And things, forums like this, talking about Prime, it helps share, it helps learn. I think I picked up a lot of comments. I've noted a lot of comments for me. So Gitika, Kiran, thank you for having me here. And I'm glad that I am one of the male allies who believe that unless we do the real power of inclusion in everything we do day in, day out, it won't really help move the needle forward.
Thank you so much, Jaspreet. And I think, moving from this perspective, we've heard a lot about corporates, but now we're moving to perspective about entrepreneurs, because that's really another area, women's entrepreneurship, to promote women's participation in the workforce at a macro level. And who better to, talk to us about women's entrepreneurship than Madhura Dasgupta, the founder of Aspire for Her. Madhura is now become a dear friend. Thank you so much for coming here. And we are going to take all the limelight from vitamins 3 and from the recent mention of all your initiatives by Mr. Amitabh Bachchan on Kaun Banega Crorepati. So we'll take a little bit of that for our event as well. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
So nice
Thank
to have
you.
you.
Thank you, Mitali. That was a very nice way of introducing me, and I feel incredibly honored that you used my name in the same sentence as Mr. Bachchan. I do not deserve that by any stretch of imagination. But I am Madhura Dasgupta Sinha. I'm the founder and CEO of Aspire for Her. And I have been a banker for the past 25 years. For the last 2 years of my life as founder and CEO of Aspire for Her has been professionally and personally the most fulfilling and the most satisfying part of my career. And why is that? Well, I was looking at gender data emanating from India. And Mitali is an expert on that. In fact, where I first bumped into Mitali was in a conversation on NDTV about gender and economics. And, out of 156 countries, India is sixth from the bottom in terms of economic participation of women. This is the Global Gender Gap Index. And I started feeling a little sorry and depressed as to why was this happening to the women in my country, who I felt were the best and the brightest in the world. And true enough, they were scoring very high in their exams. They were doing very well in terms of education. However, that education was not translating into any sort of economic prosperity for the society, for the country, for themselves or their families. And as I went a little deeper into it, I realized that the percentage of women in the workforce has been declining sharply for the past 15 years, from 2005 onwards. And I got a real shock. And I said, someone needs to do something about this problem. And I thought that someone could be me. So that's how Aspire for Her was born. Why I appreciate so much what Mitali is trying to do is we love the fact that she's actually put a structure to the problem. And the concept of a gender primer, and I actually saw the details and the way in which you've thought of the solutions, it seems wonderful. We also like to think that we are part of the solution now. I was part of the problem for the last 25 years, maybe, but now I'm happy to say that I am part of the solution. We are all part of the solution. And what we try to do at Aspire for Her is to motivate women to enter and stay in the workforce. We want to add 1 million women to the workforce additionally by 2025. And we want to do that by using the power of communities and networks. And a huge shout out here to my other friend, Varya Srivastav, who's also here. And we had occasion to bump into each other in another fascinating program that was run by Network Capital. It was all about community building. And that was when we were starting off Aspire for Her. So how do we do this? And I'm going to spend a few seconds talking to you about how do we do this, and tell you how we're today working with a whole lot of stakeholders in corporate India and the institutional world to make sure that we reach that goal of 1 million by 2025. And hey, yes, we also want to reach 10 million by 2030. So we want to buck the trend that our country is in right now, this negative trend, this negative trajectory. And we want to ensure that we are right up there in terms of the Global Gender Gap Index. And McKinsey talks about this as being the $1 trillion opportunity for India. So let me start with a little story of a girl called Priya who goes to college near Patna, in a small town near Patna. She studies psychology and she was quite content with living her life like her mother and her grandmother before her. And she was okay with getting married, having 2 kids. Today, She is talking about blockchains with her mentor from IBM. She is talking about getting into a role in artificial intelligence with JP Morgan Chase, who also happened to work with us to ensure that they have enough previews of careers for girls like Ria. What are we doing exactly? We're working on changing mindsets. Agreeably, it's a very difficult thing to change because mindsets cannot be seen or felt or smelt. But we also like structures, like Mitali. So we have a 5-point model that we use to change mindsets. The first pillar that we work on is mentors and role models. And there we have, and I see a lot of mentors and role models here. So Mitali, I am going to invite all of them. If you resonate with our cause, do come in and become part of Aspire for Her and be a part of changing the diversity equation of India. We have about 150 women leaders, CEOs, CXOs, women who are building their own businesses as mentors on our panel. They love the fact that they can actually talk to their mentees directly, and our mentees love the fact that they can interact, they have access to women leaders with only one agenda, single point agenda of seeing their professional success. So 4 out of 5 girls in India have no successful, relatable, professional women role models in their immediate network. That's what the numbers are telling us. Less than 20 out of 100 women in India today have any sort of economic agency of their own. In fact, the number is a lot less than 20. I am not going to give the exact number, but it is really, really low. The second pillar we work on is learning opportunities and resources. We work with Amazon and Google. We work with IBM and VMware. We work with LinkedIn to ensure that our members, when they're looking for jobs, they stand head over shoulders among everyone else, among an ocean of applicants when they're looking for roles, when recruiters are looking at them. It's a fantastic win-win solution because the jobs of tomorrow that will open up, these women will automatically gravitate towards those. And that's the formula that we want to work towards. The third pillar we want to work on, and we are working on, is called career previews. And this is exemplified by the line, if she can see it, she can be it. What works beautifully for us is we celebrate women and careers. We show them what the world can be like if they have a fantastic career of their own. And just a few days back, last Sunday, in fact, I was on We the Women with Barkha Dutt, and I was moderating a panel with a woman who's an engineer in NASA, a woman who trains drone drivers and makes drones for a living, Pooja Dhingra, who is the founder of Lay 15 and brought macaroons to India, and Megha Tata, one of our mentors at Aspire for Her. She also happens to be the MD and CEO of Discovery Channel. So I started with a story saying, imagine a futuristic world where you're sitting on Mars, watching your favorite Discovery Channel, and you feel like having macaroons. And hey, you get a drone to deliver them to you in Mars. And everybody liked the story. But this is how we want to open up doors and windows to people's minds in terms of creative careers which are opening up today, and so that women can reach out for them and reach for the stars. The fourth pillar that we work on is what we call the peer community. And the community connects with each other, elevates each other, motivates each other. We have a community called Return to Work. We lovingly call it R2WN. And here are women who've taken a break. There are many times when a woman comes and says that, I have an interview tomorrow. I don't know what to say. It's been 10 years since I stepped into the workforce. What do I do? 10 women will put their hand up and come to her support. And after a few days, she writes saying, hey guys, I actually got the job. And the whole world erupts, cheerleading for her and just celebrating her success. That's how the communities work. And we try to ensure that we create a safe space where women can collectively solve problems and creatively solve problems together. The last pillar that we work on is what we call 3E. And we look at, sorry, Mitali, you were saying something.
I was saying that maybe we just have about a minute left in
yeah, sorry. When I start about talking about this, I can't stop, but I'm going to finish quickly. The last pillar we work on is what we call 3E. 3E stands for employment, entrepreneurship, and education. We want every woman in India to be in 3E. And we're delighted that more than 50
corporates, more than 50 institutions today are working with us to make this dream a reality of adding 1 million women to the workplace. And I think we're probably one of the few organizations that can say that we have both Amazon and Google with us. We have both Standard Chartered and HSBC with us, and a whole lot of others as well. So we're delighted with the sort of response that we have got to this kind of community-based problem solving that we're trying out. We hope that you will all be part of our journey, and we hope that all of you will aspire for her. Thank you.
Thank you, Madhura. This is so inspiring. And, I think immediately I'll now ask Nimisha, who's again a very good friend of mine and is, an HR leader in the industry and has been in so many, organizations, but now with the startup, which is growing, I think, exponentially, to, share her views and perspectives and experiences. Nimisha, over to you.
Hi, good evening, everyone. So I'm the HR head at GRIP. We are a fintech organization. First of all, congratulations to Mithali and the team for the gender primer, talking about some really interesting questions and going forward data. I think conversations and data around this is very, very important because I feel whatever is measured eventually becomes very visible. So that's a good starting point. But is that enough? The answer is no, because you could have all the data in the world, but what you intend to do with it is what matters. And like a lot of people before me talked about, and I would want to again emphasize on this point, is that gendered inclusivity is a systemic environmental issue. Just to give you an example, we have a women's circle at my organization at GRIP, and a very young organization, 2 years into the inception. So the workforce is also very, very young. We have, here we've been talking about maternity benefits and creches, but we have the women in our organization to whom these benefits don't even, apply. But do they still have issues? The answer is yes. They are young and they talk about their families pressurizing them for marriage. So it's not after you enter a workforce and then you have to think about maternity and family. It starts way before that. It starts at a basic level. And what's interesting is when we have these discussion circles with women, a lot of people before coming to the issues they face at workplace start talking about the issues they face at home. For example, a young couple where the spouse still isn't sharing household duties, parents constantly pressurizing them for marriage. So it's a very systemic environmental issue, which of course will take a long time. But these conversations, this awareness, sensibility approach is very important when we start talking about it, start making it more visible to people. And like someone pointed that there aren't any men in the panel. So I think they should be there, and probably even family members. So I think that's the starting point, that we start looking at from a macro perspective. Gender inclusivity talks, it's a long road. It's a long road. It requires very difficult conversations. It requires difficult decisions where you have to talking about ROI to business and things. It also requires massive stakeholder alignment, So to explain to men or to make, and I think the starting point for that is empathy. Why we have these discussion circles is because there are some issues that probably just a woman can understand. So you can talk about, exposure and sensitization across, different people, but a man probably can really never know how it how it feels to be a woman or the challenges she has to face. So I think it requires a lot of empathy, and we need to drive a culture towards driving that. So a tokenistic approach or a policy-based approach, while it's good, it's not enough. It has to be a comprehensive integrated approach where we are not only talking about diversity numbers, but we are really questioning inclusion. So for example, in my organization, my diversity numbers are probably 40-60, 40 women, 60% men, but and we'll probably be 50-50 very soon. But the question is, are we truly inclusive? That's a question we keep asking ourselves as we go down this journey, because you can have, they should really feel that they belong. A different point that I would probably want to make here is, because I probably represent a younger workforce here of women who are working for the organization. If you try to give them too many special schemes, like, sometimes they feel really bad about it. And listen, hey, I'm not different. I'm the way nature made me. So don't give me these extra leaves. Maybe just, for example, period leaves. We had some of the people tell us, don't give me period leaves. Give me sick leaves and give me a no question asked, increase my sick leaves, and I'll just take a sick leave if I'm not feeling well. So don't make me stand out like I'm a special person to hire and, I'm a special initiative case here. I want to be just equal, treated as equal. So I think, and like we said, we cannot really have one persona of a woman in our mind and then design policies around that. We have to probably understand the whole life cycle a woman employee probably goes through. So when she's from between her 20 to 30s, then 30 to 40s, and so on. There was an article in HBR the other day talking about how menopausal women feel at work, that they feel that the organization does not understand them. So this is a whole life cycle that needs to be looked at, and probably at every stage of the cycle we need different interventions. And definitely a lot of this has to do with empathy, that you understand what they're going through and then provide them initiatives like that. So yeah, policy is one part of it, but action around it is totally another thing, and it has to be very customized. So yeah.
Thank you, Nimisha. And I just want to take a little, a minute to reflect on things that Jaspreet, Madhura, and Nimisha all, have told us in the last few minutes. I think what is common across all of them is this, interest to, yes, we have to bring in more representation. We all agree, I think a lot of the speakers before that as well, that we need more representation. Now, how we get to more representation? Because, Madhura is kind of, maybe I would say, at that point where she's saying, no, I have to support the women who are taking a break, returning to work. And I will do that through services that maybe no one else in the sector is currently providing, in terms of interview preparation, in terms of preparation for, preparation for that resume building or something like that, soft skills, which we lack if we take a break. But at the same time, we have people like Jaspreet and Nimisha saying, look, we understand there is this life cycle, there is this approach, and we are here to support. So I think both sides that way of this conversation are now coming together to see that, and we are seeing that convergence happening slowly. But there are still gaps. And I think Jaspreet very nicely, told us that, yes, when I went to advocate for specific interventions, then that gap became of budget availability. And I think that's where something that Srimati said right up front, that, we should not have to justify when we are investing in gender equality. It's not actually an expenditure, it's an investment into the productivity of your workforce. And I think when that understanding comes in, it really will be transformative for the organization and go beyond numbers. Numbers, we all agree, I think we all have different perspectives, but we agree that they are required, they're essential, they are the, the devils in the room that you need to work with that. And I think with our primer, we are able to provide at least a method to the madness, right? And say, okay, this is step 1, step 2, go serially, approach this in a methodical fashion and reach a point where maybe you would be at a point where you think, yes, this is the policy I want to back for this year. It's an incremental approach that we've also taken in the primer. We can't, say, okay, please put all of your HR budget for this. We would like to, but we don't say that. But yes, an incremental approach is, I think, something we can all converge on. So with that, Sujata, if you don't mind, I might move to Jeenal first because she just needs to leave and then we'll come back to you. So Jeenal Jain is a Senior Analyst, Diversity, Equity and Inclusion at Great Place to Work. A great place to work, which has been doing great work with a number of organizations. And Jeenal, we are so glad to have you. Please, floor is with you.
Thank you so much, Mitali. I think before I start off, I remember the conversation we had. The first thing I asked her, we met at Leap Club, by the way. It's a organization where you help women get into leadership position. I asked her if I think your panel sounds very mature. Should I really come? I mean, I'm really just 2 years into the whole corporate world. The first thing she said, you know what, I'm giving you an opportunity, just come. You know, she's not only just creating, you know, frameworks around it, she's actually practicing what she believes. And I truly respect you for that. And a big congratulations on, you know, launching the gender primer. Now coming to the, I truly believe that everything that has been shared today is so much of a value add for me as well. I hope I'm able to add some incremental points to the whole conversation, but I'm going to give it my best shot. So I'm Gina, and my pronouns are she and her. Over the last 17 months at Great Place to Work in the DEI team, I've spent time talking to more than 150 organizations about what are their DEI visions, or you know, what are their problem statements really. In my opinion, the core realizations that I've had when it comes to some non-negotiable truths about DEI is, number one is DEI is never one size that fits all. It has to be custom built for every organization, whether you're a manufacturing firm or a tech firm, startup, or very well-funded organization, you will have different requirements. Second, leaders do set the tone for the culture, but I think managers are really the link who manifest the culture. So training managers to show inclusive behaviors is really crucial, but it is very underrated in general. Third is DI strategies take time. They will not show results overnight. So you really have to be consistent and committed with time as well as money. Madhura did speak about how the gender gap has, like we are at 140 out of 156 organization. In 2020, we were at 112 out of 153 organization, which means we've actually had a drop of 28 places, which shows that probably we've, in an ad hoc manner, we've created certain policies, probably copy pasted some of the other policies onto ours. But they're not sustainable, right? You have to think about your own employees, think about your future of the employees and your future workforce when you're creating these policies. Someone also mentioned about how we are an early startup, and some of our employees are not even experiencing maternity, but they have different things to think about. So really, policies is a very long, you need to have a very broad lens when you're curating them. Great Place to Work has been doing this study called as India's Best Workplaces for Women. In 2022, they found that majority of the women who are from the best workplaces had higher scores on psychological safety, having unique benefits, as well as the work-life balance experience, which means when you really speak about fairness, the base would probably be identifying and acknowledging the unique needs of every employee. That's a key factor for creating gender inclusive workplaces. We see organizations who have moved from, we have a zero discrimination policy, yes, but what beyond that? Are you really just tolerating differences, or are you really celebrating them? You need to constantly ask these questions to yourself. This year, we've had so many organizations have so many campaigns around Women's Day. We have organizations who put up, we are an equal opportunity employer. But when you take a step back, is your website, vision friendly for someone who's blind? Even if you're an equal opportunity employer, is your screen reader friendly? And all of those things are also important to be thought about when you make a statement that, yeah, we are an equal opportunity provider. Inclusive policies are definitely the bedrock of creating an inclusive and equitable workplace. But there are two further points that I would like to add to it. Having policies on a handbook is one thing, but practicing those policies will really translate into employee experience. You actually have to nudge your employees to use those policies, only then they translate into employee experience. Second, don't go out hunting for new policies. take a step back, revisit your policies currently, probably upcycle them to meet the unique needs of all your employees. We've been constantly speaking about how the entire life cycle of an employee matters. Let's start with, like, you usually start with access, right? So hiring, infrastructure, then how are you integrating them into your organization? How are you ensuring that there are leadership connects? How are you supporting them while they are there? How are you ensuring that you're developing them internally? And then finally, how is your pay parity checks done? So for starters, have you removed all barriers to entry? Do you have gender neutral JDs? Do you have okay, I'm going to conclude in a minute. Cool, I'm going to run through this. What I was trying to say is, let's look at a couple of these life cycle bits. Integrate. You've removed all the barriers to entry. Once you integrate them, it's not only that you need to sensitize the new joinee, you will also have to sensitize your existing workforce. For example, if you're introducing a group of transgender folks into your company, you will have to sensitize your existing workforce about, respectful communications. What are their realities? You have to create that empathy or that unconscious bias into them. When you talk about development, mentorship programs for a person who's returning from a career break, or a person like me who's just starting off their career, the needs will be very different. So how are you ensuring that all your policies are covering these different aspects and thinking beyond just, oh, we have policies for women, but really, do you have policies for all kinds of women, all kinds of gender, all kinds of human beings? That's when you really have policies that cater to those inclusive experiences. Finally, you've gone through the whole policies entire life cycle. Take a step back and try to revisit them every once in a while. See how your employees are experiencing these policies. How are they receiving it? Because you must have done a one check for policies, but it's regularly important to see how efficient they've been, check some metrics. Some things might be working, some things might not be working. So only when you really measure it regularly, they get managed and they get improved over and over time. That's about it. I think I would like to conclude with one last thing. On a personal note, apart from all the policies, be it male or female, there's a lot of unlearning that we have to do when it comes to patriarchy. As an individual myself, I had a very hard time telling myself, like, I asked myself, what are some of the patriarchal things that I am conveniently using, supporting, taking my parents' support, because that's how I've been brought up. Maybe my brother was not pushed to be independent, but I consciously took a decision to, no, I'm not going to follow the same footsteps. I'm going to unlearn the patriarchy that was thrown at me. So the first step will really start with women themselves. Equal opportunities need to come in, but action also needs to come in from our end.
Thank you. Thank you, Jinal. And, we have about 4 or 5 speakers left, and we have about 15-20 minutes to go. So I'd really request everyone to keep their remarks to 5 minutes. We do have time, so it's okay. But, we are, of course, running late. So with that, Sujata, inviting you, no pressure to keep it on time from PwC, my very, very dear friend. Thank you.
Thank you, Mithali. And I think it's been a great experience. And I feel it was absolutely worth to travel from Calcutta to be part of this entire gathering virtually and as well as physically with all of you. And with such believers along with you, when you feel that this journey, that you're not alone. And I think that faith itself keeps us going. And I think people like Jaspreet and many of our male colleagues who works with us, I think makes us believe that we need to continue on this journey. While I represent a corporate organization, but I'm a development sector professional, and I have seen this, I've been part of this transformational journey for over 2 decades, like many of you here. And starting my journey in the development sector organization and now in a corporate organization and working with a large cross section of organizations, I feel that we all have our own challenges and we are not really very different from each other. While being part of a very rights-focused organization, I thought that gender equality, diversity issues were very much present, challenges were present there as well. But I feel that there is an increasing opportunity and environment for us to make these things visible, talk about it, bring in transformation. Working in a corporate organization like PwC has, I think, given us an immense exposure, and being part of it for the over 1 decade in this, I have seen how the organization has evolved in its diversity dialogue. So diversity dialogue, which talks definitely about gender equality, talks about women's empowerment, but really expands its horizon to bring in the LGBTQ community, not just in verse, but also in practice, allowing people to open up, share their experiences, encourage diversity to be really part of a business strategy. So I'll really highlight a couple of things that I think are important to talk about and probably important to mention. I think when we are talking, and Mithali, this gender primer, we are talking about making things actionable. I think it's time that we find ways, tools, mechanisms, platforms, relationships, partnerships that will enable a diverse workforce to survive, not just in business organizations, but as I said, in a cross section of organizations, people who are part of research organization, academia. I'm sure challenges exist there as well. So I think it's important to share our commonalities, our differences, and the challenges that we face in every context. So I think one of the most important things that I have learned in this journey is it's not just important to talk about it in isolation, but it is important to bring it as a part of core business strategy. So in this, I would share this experience that we have, and as I said, that each organization evolves at its own pace. And I've seen that in PwC, we're now talking about the new equation. The new equation is about celebrating diversity. In each of our stationaries now we are a community of solvers, building trust and delivering sustained outcomes. So it really brings in, and it really drills down in everybody's mind. We cannot, so it's not in one day that we can transform our minds. It's a journey. We are at it. And I think we are at an opportune moment. And I think the primer gives us one driver. And Mithali, that, I'm one of those persons who are also trying to help government organizations, private sector organizations to achieve their sustainability goals. And you see with the regulations, the investor interest, the ESG mandate, we really have an opportunity. We are in a time where we do have an environment where we can put this in forefront. And I think while business leaders, large organization has a great role to play. I think MSME and the dialogue of getting them on board and recognizing and probably recognizing and incentivizing some of the incredible work that MSMEs are doing is very important. So in this context, to take DNI beyond DE&I rather, beyond your own internal organizational purview is also important. Why don't talk about your responsible supply chains, your value chains, people who come and who are in the periphery. They also need this responsible approach to come in. So I think it's important for all of us to kind of look at the wider perspective also. And all of you are doing such incredible work. I think we should all draw inspiration from each other. Thank you. And thanks a lot for this incredible opportunity. Thank you, Mithali.
Thank you. Thank you, Sujata. Thank you for coming from my second home to my first home. And with that, I'd like to invite Shweta Anand Arora of the Core Question. She's the founder and also happens to be my cousin. So, disclaimer there that this is family talking. So Shweta, over to you.
Yeah, thank you. Well, first of all, congratulations, Mithali. This is just fantastic to see, the conversation you've initiated with this primer and the work that you've done, bringing these important issues up front. So our organization works with senior leaders on developing their leadership. And so the perspective I wanted to bring was basically, having sort of been in those rooms and heard sort of very intimate conversations, what is it that we've heard from women and from men about some of the challenges they've faced, about how they've received some of these policies, But before I get to that, and there are basically only three things I want to talk about. So two are the perspective, from these conversations. But before that, I wanted to also just share this one piece of research I came across recently, which I found really, really valuable about just the importance. I mean, we're all believers here, that's why we're here, but just the importance of having, more women in leadership, looking at really dissecting their effectiveness as leaders. And this research was by an organization called the Leadership Circle that has collected data from thousands and thousands of, respondents across thousands of organizations, large and small, over several years. And they did this research where they picked out what they call high creative and high reactive leaders. And that's sort of two ends of a spectrum. And they found that high creative leaders really are, far more effective. And this effectiveness also correlates with business performance. And what I was really surprised to see was that, in this research, while in their overall sample, there were about 38% women, the high creative group, which was at the 87th percentile in terms of leadership effectiveness, had a much huger representation of women. So it had 54% women compared to like 38% as the average. And the low, the high reactive group, which was basically the low leadership effectiveness at the sort of 10th percentile, actually had only 22% women as compared to the 38% average. So it was really fascinating to see how, this research really showed how women are following a much more effective sort of approach to leadership, one that is, and high creative, they define as something which is far more relational, creates a purposeful vision for the organization, has much greater systems awareness, and is able to lead really from authenticity. So, I thought it was really fascinating to see sort of this data that backs. I think we've already seen data around how, business performance is linked to diversity, but it was also really useful just from a leadership lens to see this data. And the two things that I have really seen very closely from my work with leaders is one that, and I think some of this has been talked about, that, it has to be, the conversation has to be broader, organizational. When I started work, one of the beliefs I had wrongly was that imposter syndrome is something that, women face. And it was something that came up very often in my conversations with women. But then what I realized was that actually imposter syndrome is fairly universal. And, anyone who's trying to do something which is out of their comfort zone, which is challenging, which is a new role, when they're pushing their boundaries, you're bound to face imposter syndrome. I think the only difference I saw was that maybe, women have a slightly higher tendency to cancel themselves out and say, oh, maybe I won't put my hand up because of the imposter syndrome. I mean, men equally face that, but they're still putting their hand up, even if they're 60% ready. And I think the larger, thought I want to plant is that as cultures in organizations, are we creating space for vulnerability and asking for help, not just by women, but by everyone? Is it okay to say, I'm not completely ready, but these are the things I need? And right now, I don't think it is. People really put up these perfect masks, and which is why a lot of times women end up saying, yeah, maybe I'm not ready. So really, can we have those conversations? And can we create, these buddy mentorship, these conversations where they realize that, you don't have to be 100% ready. And the second is really around, again, some people spoke to this, that it has to be sort of addressing unique needs, and it can't be blanket. You cannot assume needs of women and try and treat them as special or different. I've really heard, rage, frustration, anger from women who have, say, come back after maternity, and it has been assumed that, oh, now you will need special consideration, their portfolios have been reduced. And it's all coming from a well-intentioned place of being supportive or, being sensitive, but actually it's falling completely in the wrong direction. So how can we, really listen to each person's needs, perspectives. What is it that they, how is it that they want to, be treated, and customize our approach to that instead of trying to, have blanket this thing. And how can we be more sensitive to real needs instead of making assumptions? So yeah.
Right. Thank you for that, Shweta. It was really, really insightful. I think dispelling those biases and myths. All of us have these preconceived notions and ideas that, oh, this is how women must be, but it's not like that. And I think your remarks really shed light on that. With that, I'd like to invite Divya Shekhar, who's a journalist at Forbes and has also become a very good friend of mine in the last few years. Divya, I would love to learn from you from a wider industry perspective, but also, in the media industry, any thoughts, views that you would like to share? You're on mute. I was wondering how can we have been through a whole event where I haven't said it even once. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mithali. It's wonderful to be here, and I've been in touch with Mithali and her team for at least the past 3 odd years, and we've spoken on a range of things. Starting from, say, the need for gender-sensitive policies to equity and diversity at the workplace, etc. So it's really nice to be here, and it's many of you all have made such evocative comments through your experiences. So mine is more of a ringside view that I have through my experience as a journalist, talking to people on ground about various aspects of DEI and gender sensitive policies, etc. This evening, 2 points that really caught my attention were, when Nimisha and Jinal spoke about the gap that exists between policies on paper and their implementation. That is something that I have seen over the years. And, when Jaspreet also spoke about, say, there not being budgets set aside for specific requirements. So, I mean, all these are, I have often seen companies take small steps towards DEI, but it's always been on a need-to basis, and more or less it's always been from a place that's relatively comfortable to them. So I think, like, for example, there is data that suggests that, most DEI allocation go towards traditional traditional areas, like, say, maternal care, or diversity hiring, or leadership development, for etc. So taking a step forward here would be that, okay, there'll always be targets for your hiring squad, but in the absence of identifiable queer individuals, for example, no real opportunities would be created for them at the workplace. Taking a step forward would be, like Shweta also pointed out, creating safe spaces for people, for women to come and talk about, say, how domestic labor affects their contribution to work, or how they show up to work, or whether or not they are able to show up to work. A conversation with an employee with a global consultancy a couple of months ago. She identifies as trans woman. She said that, what about making official communications and documents inclusive of all genders and personal pronouns? So instead of saying, hey guys, or hi ladies and gentlemen, how about saying, hey folks? Just to so it's just about going beyond your comfort zones. I feel for companies to actually sit down, listen, and take note of the small aspects and the big aspects that affect DEI in organizations. It's not just about top down, but also about sensitization across levels and across segments and teams, in a way that it really shows a positive impact in day-to-day communication, which is what matters. So I really, and in the past 2 years, as a journalist, I have seen organizations, big and small, do a complete overhaul, change their strategies, policies, processes, everything in a matter of a few weeks or a few months to just sort of meet with the evolving needs of the pandemic. I mean, whether be it transitioning to work from home, etc. So I think it's high time that companies are also a little more intentional about inclusivity and diversity. While there have been steps taken, and many of us have addressed it in this evening as well. But there is, of course, a lot more scope for improvement, which I also hope to track in the times to come. So thank you. Thanks again for the opportunity, and it was wonderful being here.
Thank you so much, Divya. I love the piece that you spoke about having the intent and acting upon that when the time's right. So thank you so much for that. Next, I would like to call on Adrija Bose, who is a senior editor.
Hi. I'm sorry, I'm outside, so there may be a little bit of a noise, but this has been so great. I joined a bit late, but some splendid conversation and great insights. So my quick short summary from all of this is that, my understanding of women in newsrooms have been such a huge thing, which kind of explains the whole gender dynamics that you see on media coverage as well. So, for example, just to add this, right? Because what happens, who covers what stories in media makes a lot of change when it comes to policies as well, right? So when we talk about covering gender issues, it takes a very small corner of a newspaper, or like makes for a very small section of your publication. So and that happens because there are not many editors who are women, and that makes a great impact on what we cover as well. So that's just what I wanted to share with all of you, that while you will see a lot of women journalists in the industry, but because they're not in positions of making those decisions, you see that there are multiple reports showing that younger women are on TV platforms, for example, in TV media. The older women are not at TV media, they'll rather be on print media. So there is a lot of bias and sexism that happens in our profession, and that reflects on the stories that we cover and how media covers policy issues when it comes to gender and everything else. So that's just my little perspective and little addition to this great conversation. Thank you, Mitali. Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Adrija. A very different perspective. Thank you for that. Next, I would like to invite Goda Raghavan, who's a partner with AK Law Chambers. Goda, over to you.
Hi, thank you very much, and thank you, Mitali. I think it's going back to our LSE days of being associated and continuing our association therefrom. So when first Mitali spoke to me about this, I was like, okay, so I'm a lawyer who works with a lot of corporates, but the entire legal sector and the entire legal fraternity is very different from the perspective of, let's say, a typical corporate organization. It's viewed very differently. So, I mean, yes, well, there are women and there are issues that everybody faces, irrespective of which sector that you work in. But I think the entire legal sector stands on a slightly different footing, right? It's completely different when, let's say, you're doing your litigation lawyer, in the sense that you're a disputes lawyer, as in you go to court. Irrespective of what kind of a policy I have in my organization, the entire sector, the entire industry needs to be sensitized. And me as an organization can do very little. I mean, we could probably put in, let's say, a maternity leave, for example, right? We could put in that, or maybe you say, okay, listen, give me a menstrual period break, which is fine. But then if on a Monday morning you have a case assigned to you and you have to be in court on that day, irrespective of an organization policy that I put in place, I have to show up in court. There are no two ways about it. I've been on this case. It's a very personal skill. So who can replace me? Can I stand up in court and tell the judge that I'm on XYZ leave and therefore I cannot turn up in court? But it's different, right? So I'm right now, I know it's a new mom, but I have two young boys who are below the age of 5, right? It's an everyday struggle. It's literally an everyday struggle to be able to show up. It's a hustle. It's definitely worth it. We as an organization believe that we do empathize, we understand, but then how do you create a policy for an organization which is not independent of the sector that we work in, right? So until and unless you see enough number of women, let's say in the judiciary, how do you stand up in court and say, I have a 3-month-old child at home and maybe the child had fever one day, for example, so I cannot turn up in court? So that doesn't really work. So when we're looking at policy in the legal sector, I think it needs to go a step beyond just your law firm that you're working at. It's not just the partner who you're working with or the team that you're with. But then again, when you look at the entire legal fraternity, we also have corporate law firms, and I work also on the corporate side, which is less court work and more, say, private equity or mergers and acquisitions, where we get the liberty of scheduling our day the way we want to. And the way Nimisha said that, empathy is everything. And that's what a lot of speakers spoke about. For us, it helps that I'm going through the phase that I am going through. And therefore, we are able to, without putting it down in a policy point of view, there is a very personal connect. We're a boutique law firm. My entire team is full of women, but we're all young women, right? So nobody in my team is married to actually say, okay, I want like maternity break as an example, or people who are going through menopause. But we still understand if a colleague of mine tells me that let's say I have a period cramp, I can't come to office. It's fine. So long as there's flexibility of work hours, so long as you tell me that this is my expectation, this is the deadline that I can work towards and therefore work around it, then it's okay. So I don't think when you say policy needs to be looked at in the sense of which sector do you stand in? How do you make your policy effective in the sector that you're working in? As a corporate law firm, we can put in, to some extent, we say, okay, you need to take a mandatory, let's say 1 week off every 6 months, so that the burnout is very real. I speak from a legal sector point of view. As a lawyer, our burnout is literally every 6 months we peak, and then you see the productivity just crashing. And since it's a very personalized service, it's not that if I was working on a specific deal, somebody else can just step in and take over seamlessly. It doesn't really work in that sense. So we try and we formulate a lot of issues, but I think I'm quite happy to say this, that just because you're a woman, I don't think there is that discrimination in sense of growth. Law firms and lawyers are very happy to pick up capable women because talent is really the focus, and talent retention is extremely important. So when we look at our associates or our team, we look at them as a resource. It doesn't matter. You could be a woman, you could be a man, you could be a trans, you could be literally anybody. If you're a good person, you're dedicated, you're out there, you're creating value, you're an asset to our firm, we are willing to go that extra mile to retain you in the firm. So in that sense, well, if you did take a maternity break, you would lose out that much of an experience, or the 6 months or the 8 months of the race per se. But if you're generally a person who's able to step up and say, listen, I'm going to push myself back in, the legal sector doesn't really differentiate you purely because there is a gender bias. Now, that being said, I think since there's so much of talk on women in coming back to the workforce, we see very few women sticking on beyond the initial 5-year mark. And that's purely because coming back takes so much effort. You've lost the court craft of coming back in. It's very difficult to build that kind of confidence to be able to stand up and talk, argue your point in court. It's very difficult to, let's say, talk to your client convincingly, to negotiate your deal. It requires that confidence, which I think you do lose out at some point. But how do you frame a policy around this, right? I'm very happy to take back somebody in. There is a difference. So the hustle is real. And several of us, do like to keep it saying, okay, fine, even if you're on maternity break, I give you the flexibility of not really taking the break. You work from home, it's fine. We won't push you in, let's say, partner level. We'll probably keep you as an off counsel, so you don't have the typical targets that you have to meet or the typical crazy work hours that you have to do. But it's an alternate kind of a setup that gives you the space, but you're always welcome to step back into leadership when you think you're ready. You're not out of the race. So I think all of these are important. All of this being said, I think that when we look at a policy, at least in the legal sector, it's really important that we look at it as an industry as the whole and not so much as a very organization specific policy. But it's been amazing listening to everybody's points of view, and I second everything. It's a great conversation. Thank you, Mitali, for having this whole session.
Thank you so much, Koda. Very interesting and insightful and a very balanced view that we got, of the legal sector. Thank you so much for sharing that. Next, I'd like to invite Swarnima Bhattacharya, who's yeah, Swarnima. Over to you.
Okay, hello everyone. Sorry, Mitali, I the time overshot a bit, and unfortunately, there's so much packed. But thank you so much. I mean, there's a lot that I'm Swarnima. I'm the co-founder of Thea. It's a women's health platform, and so the two perspectives I'll try to bring in today is number one, women's health, and number two, I have been an ICC member in several companies, corporate startups, and various others. So also pulling in perspectives from there, the idea of sexual harassment and other things, So 2 points I will draw from. Number one is what Mitali said during her introduction, that while there are many companies that are eager to implement policies which are mandated by law, there are so many things that are softer. There are so many things that are invisible that we are failing to consider. That is number one. Number two is what the speaker from the core question mentioned, the idea of imposter syndrome. And I wanted to address that as the starting point of, what I wanted to say, which is, there was a recent study that came out that said that we love to say that, women most of the time have imposter syndrome, but the problem is not imposter syndrome. The problem is that we say that this is a syndrome at all. The fact that, women who are coming into workplaces and they are facing different kinds of implicit and explicit biases, not explicit maybe all the time, but implicit biases, they are put in a position to having to second guess themselves at all times. And that is not imposter syndrome. That is a cultural problem. And that's why we don't have to fix women and coach them. And, of course, you have to coach them, you have to mentor them, you have to, guide them to be professionals, etc. But, alongside fixing and preparing women, we have to refix and re-prepare culture. Because when we think of, women at the workplace or women in any space for that matter, we have to probably see the core of the problem, which is that women have actually been afterthoughts to infrastructure. Whether we talk about transport, we talk about the medical system, we talk about the workplace, unfortunately, women have been afterthoughts to that, in the medical fraternity, people say that, women are not just men with tubes and boobs, they are not just smaller men. They are physiologically different. Every cell in our body has a sex, and that has an impact in the way we are negotiating workplaces. So as somebody who's been on, I think I've lost count of the number of, unfortunately, sexual harassment cases I've sat in, been a part of. Most of the time I have seen, and this is something that, I'd love some data on as well, because of confidentiality, there is so little that we can share. Most of the time you will see that these cases are improprieties on the basis of, okay, some behavioral things that are very hard for male co-workers to deal with. Whether it is, okay, but she was drinking at the party, but she's always having these after work hour drinks with this senior colleague or something, etc. So there are these little behavior things that people from, who've come from, a certain socioeconomic spaces, they will misunderstand that. And there are improprieties based on that, where they will crack some inappropriate joke or they will make some inappropriate comment. Most of the issues are actually like this. And it is a question of culture. And I don't remember who said it, but somebody said it very correctly, that, our young men who are coming from certain cultures, are they able to accept women as co-workers, as colleagues, as, leaders, etc.? That is a very key issue that we are not fixing, and it needs to be fixed. And therefore, it is very pertinent that when we talk about, I actually find it a bit, non-nuanced when we say gender neutral policies, because yes, it is true, policies have to be gender neutral, men have to be part of the conversation, that is true. But if we fail to account for the unique challenges that women are facing, then we are actually we're again falling into the trap of making, women as afterthoughts in policy, just as they have been in infrastructure. That is a lacking nuance that we have to address. Now, coming to women's health, this is something we often don't think about, that women's health at the workplace, what is it? Why does it, but the fact is that it is actually true. Now, I'll give you some data. 60 to 70% of chronic illnesses in the workforce populations is actually in women and not men, out of which 90% are hormonal conditions, 66% are behavioral health issues, 50% is, blood sugar and metabolism, diabetes and all that chronic stuff. And 80% is autoimmune conditions. This is real data. And what happens is that if you, there was a study that came out that was specific to India, which said that more than 82% women have often taken over-the-counter medication for pain management during their periods or around PMS or PMDD or, during these things, just to, step into work. Now, the question is that, there are some companies that are doing this period leave, policy, which is all very well, like, women with PCOS, endometriosis, various other things, PMDD, they do face, an extra, pain and discomfort, which prevents them from working. But I think that we need to go a little bit beyond period leave and talk about period inclusion at the workplace, which is not just for conditions, not only that if somebody has a PCOS or something like that, but even, when a person is going through menopause, a menopause is not a health condition. It is a natural process that happens to, a lot of cishet women. And that should not be a part of some sickness. It should not be reframed as a sickness, because that again reinforces the age-old, adage that, women are too hormonal to be at work. And these are precisely the things that we have to question. Studies actually show that women above 50 are refocusing on their careers because, now their children are, I don't know, like married or, now, so women are actually able to refocus on themselves, and to categorize them as sick simply because they are going through menopause at that time is extremely problematic, right? So now coming to very quickly, that, even when we're talking about, when I said, as what you call afterthoughts to infrastructure, there are so many things that, women, according to the data, they actually have more, cardiovascular problems. They have carpal tunnel syndrome, tendinitis, respiratory diseases, anxiety and stress disorders, issues related to pregnancy. These are all things that are related to productivity at work and related to what you call productivity at work. There is poor ergonomic research. This is something that people will think is very niche, but actually it's not. Poor ergonomic research is leading to women having more musculoskeletal diseases at the workplace. And if people think that musculoskeletal diseases are just about take a physiotherapy appointment and you'll be fine, people are sadly mistaken. This is related to your gut health. It's related to your mental health. It's related to your, for those who care about it, fertility health, etc. And I dare say a lot of people still care about fertility health. So, so now what can be, I mean, as a women's health organization, me and my co-founder 2 years ago, we were like, oh, you know what, we're going to buck the trend. We'll be all about PCOS and endometriosis and autoimmune, but where are we getting our biggest traction revenue from? Fertility. So, those are the realities that we can't help but deal with. That's why maternal benefits and all those things, they become an essential part of policy because it is still real for many women. Yes, we have seen that women are thinking about these things at a later stage in life, maybe in their 30s rather than in in their 20s, but it's still not a pressure that's going away easily, and it will be a mistake to think that, somehow we will, make some advancements and we will efface that concern altogether. Now, just to give some examples in terms of, what can be done, or since we're talking about diversity and inclusion, I'll wrap up very quickly. The role of businesses, now 190 million women in work, work in the global supply chain in countries in the global south, at least 190 million women, right? And most of the countries in the global south, they have very high gaps in unmet needs for healthcare services. These are not countries where, a woman can, from a certain socioeconomic sector can just walk into a private hospital and get the best care. So what is the role of businesses? The businesses can therefore play a huge role. The research shows that when big businesses invest in women's health, it leads to higher productivity, earning potential, and loyalty to the company. And I know that this is extremely, we've argued against it, that why do we give defenses, that, if we want better policies, why should there be defenses and why should we make a case? But just because the realities of small businesses is such that they cannot afford a number of things. So there is data out there, specifically in the Indian and the global South context, that investing in women's health actually increases, the earning potential of the individual and also of the company. And therefore, the businesses can provide what individuals can often not access, which is, high quality health insurance, sexual and reproductive health services, urgent care services, and much more than that. Now, just to give an example to conclude my point on how this is being, implemented, one example is what UNFPA is doing. It has created a return on investment tool, which is specifically being used by small business owners. So they can actually input what they are spending for their, employees, especially women employees, and they can see what return on investment they will get. Now, while this is deeply problematic, maybe this is a place to start to make a wider case and make it a more systemic solution rather than just another afterthought, right? And this tool is being used in over 50 million, for more than 50 million women in the formal as well as informal sectors in Philippines, Sri Lanka, and Bangladesh as part of UNFPA's initiative. So just to conclude, when we talk about diversity, equity and inclusion, I think the one thing that we have to keep talking, and this is something that COVID, for better or for worse, has given us this, perspective, that nothing is, so, monolithic and static. The idea of work, the idea of productivity, the idea of measuring, higher outcomes in business, these are all very dynamic definitions. We have accomplished something by working from home. Companies have run smoothly. Some have made God knows how much in profit, millions, in profit, etc. But people have been working from home, etc., etc. So we shouldn't have needed a very deadly and, traumatizing pandemic. But I mean, let's take lessons from wherever we can and really start questioning workplace models as we know them currently. And it is extremely important now for women's leadership to permeate at all levels, as many people have already pointed out, that it is not just about, women's leadership. It is not just about women's representation. It's really preparing women to imagine work and education as a viable option in their lives and not just the alternative, which is a very straightforward path of, marriage, children. Not that one has a problem with that, but that an alternative exists, in terms of a career, in terms of education, that alternative exists, that alternative is fulfilling, that alternative is rewarding, that needs to be inserted into our society. And of course, women cannot do this alone. They shouldn't do this alone. I mean, why should they, right? One tiny example to round off my points and, to sort of close this is that, a few days ago, somebody told me that, God, my help is not here. And instead of, doing my product, whatever meeting, I spent 2 hours in the kitchen. Kitchen is where women's dreams go to die. I had a hearty laugh, and I didn't disagree. But I also felt compelled to point out to her that in India, in the last 5 to 6 years, women are taking charge and they're subverting the idea of the kitchen. cloud kitchens run by women and home kitchens run by women have not only seen millions of dollars, and this is like a real statistic from just from the Indian startup ecosystem. Cloud kitchens and home-based kitchens run from women. All these women, a lot of these women are not entrepreneurs. I mean, they've not had a corporate, training or anything like that. A lot of them, are young women who are saying, my mother cooks and bakes very well. I want to set up something for her. And they have set up these cloud kitchens and home kitchens, and they're subverting the space of the kitchen. So the idea of women at work and the idea of women's representation in the economy is not just about what we are able to accomplish in a corporate workspace or in a boardroom, but everywhere. So that is something that so it is very easy to say a kitchen is a kitchen, and and that is true for a lot of women, but we also have to look at the subversive sides of what these spaces have the potential to become. And if homes can be a subversive and they have the potential to become empowering for women, then so can workplaces. So with that, I would just like to conclude, and thank you so much, and apologies for the hurry. I hope I didn't mess up the lineup or something.
Thank you so much. I think a lot of different perspectives and a lot of insights into the data that you shared. Thank you so much for that. Next, I'd like to invite Pragya, who's the global content lead at Kohler.
So am I the last person to go? All right. Okay. I'm going to be very short. And if my short isn't short enough, please feel free to nudge me, give me a death stare, whatever. I work with Kohler. I'm representing Kohler. I have recently picked on a new role wherein I'm leading diversity for Kohler. And firstly, thank you so much. I'm overjoyed to be a part of this conversation. Such amazing, diverse thoughts, experiences have been shared, and I've learned a lot. I'm going to be very crisp. A lot of things have already been shared, so I won't repeat them. Just from my experience, I feel two very important things that we in the space need to really keep in mind are, we've spoken about the fact that this is more than policies and interventions and stuff like that. It's more about mindsets, right? We are dealing with people who have come into an organization with 30-35 years of mindsets. So really, we're dealing with breaking some mindsets and remolding these mindsets. And all of us are working with, people who are really educated, come from really great backgrounds. But I've noticed, and I'm sure all of us have, that at the face of it, everyone seems to be completely woke and all about gender equality. But the minute you start scratching the surface, the realities of that patriarchal mindset, those nuances really start shining through. So it's really about these constant conversations that we as organizations need to have to break these mindsets and remold these mindsets. And we need to probably stop thinking that, we're doing this and this breaking and remolding of mindsets, we're doing this for, our organization to probably meet its DEI targets or probably make our organization a more DEI friendly space, but more so to make the community, one. So an associate from my organization goes to another and champions this entire inclusion agenda. That is what we're supposed to look at. The second thing I've noticed is that what really helps in driving this entire agenda within an organization is, finding those loud and proud voices that are really going to support you. You'll find, apart from obviously HR, you'll have multiple people who completely believe in the idea of gender equality and, all of these things. But how many of them are actually going to stand by you and loudly talk about it and support you in your initiatives? So those are the people, those are the voices, influential voices that you really need to find, really need to leverage to drive this conversation, to break these mindsets. And I think these two things, when done, that's the bedrock of everything else. That's when we'll start really solving the problem at a granular level. So yeah, I'm going to wrap up there. I know we're short on time. So yeah, thanks.
Thank you so much. And now we have our last speaker for the day, Anju Pandey, who's the program officer with UN Women. Where's Anju? Anju.
Thank you so much. Yeah, thank you so much.
Sorry, that's fine. My God, this has been such an engaging conversation, and I'm absolutely, Mitali, not even going to try to sum up what has just been said in the room, just the range, the diversity, the depth of issues. Absolutely. I don't think, I'll be able to do any justice to it if I start looking at, really summing it up as was prompted to me in the chat. Mitali, I do want to congratulate you and your team, but not just you and your team, but actually each of the speakers, those amazing women out there and the lone man who was among us, who spoke, and just like I said, the range of issues. I do want to, Mitali, however, I was smiling in my head and I was thinking, oh my God, Mitali, this is the time to take gender budgeting to the private sector, So I was like, come on, guys, because and I think this has been a story everywhere. That's been my experience of working with the private sector. And if I pick on the industry that I worked with, which was the tea sector, absolutely, the return on investment is the first thing that they come back. They'll ask you, how much are those gender equality initiatives going to cost? We don't have the budgets. And I think, it's time, and we heard those voices in the room, that we have to stop using that business case, So I completely echo what Srimati had said in the beginning, that, or maybe, we do where we're looking at the business case that goes hand in hand with the human rights, or as I say, as equal citizens of this country, the moment you flip that, I know the negotiations become harder, but we are not apologetic. We have to stop apologizing for, I know, Mitali, I use the word incremental a lot, but increasingly I'm saying stop it. We don't have to use incremental, because the 2030 SDGs are not even 8 years away. And then in my head, I think, why should we even wait until 2030? So a couple of thoughts, because I know we're really running over time and patience both, despite the fact that this has been such an engaging conversation. I thought, in addition to the fact that we're really looking at women's economic autonomy and economic rights. Everything that has been said about this continuum of who you are as a private person, who you are in public spaces, who you are at the workspaces. And I definitely want to include the digital spaces, because, just like how, the last speaker was talking about, just the nature of work, the definitions of work, paid for, not paid for, 92% of women still in the unorganized sector, just to add one more to the data point. So I think it's really critical that in this whole conversation, the one word that I want to bring in, just for us to be kind of more aware, is power. All these strategies that we're talking about, because we continue to see that inequality of power at the workplace. There were amazing examples that are being shared, and we have to completely stop, sort of saying, why is it that we are talking more about women and girls? So while I completely echo the thoughts where we're looking at the range of diversities, and the two that I wanted to add in there were also caste and class, because we talked about age, we talked about disabilities, we talked about sexual orientation, we talked about trans persons, but I think it's really critical to bring in caste and class as well, because they really play out at the workplace. So I would think that, when you're looking at the diversity, do look at genders, intersections with a lot of other indicators. And probably that will help us tailor some of the strategies on diversity, equity, and inclusion. I was smiling also in my head thinking, thank God it's not diversity, inclusion, and equity, because then it would be die before even we start, So just in terms of playing on the word. I think a third thing in addition to this that I wanted to really bring to everybody's attention is that even when we're looking at carving the strategies, the 4 words, and Mitali probably has heard it many times that I talk about, is to anything that has to do with diversity, equity, and inclusion has to center stage the women's voice, choice, agency, and safety. the HR, I mean, even if it has women, will have to go out there. And I completely agree with the previous speakers who talked about the leadership in the business. So it has to be driven from there, but it has to be at all levels. But also the forums that we are creating, just like this forum. So I was assumed that, imagine if these kind of conversations were being held in the multiple workforces that we're talking about, because, right now we see a certain kind of us who are in the room, and we know very well that women are not a homogeneous constituency. So when we're looking at the diversity, equity, inclusion, then I also think about, who are you including? What are those diversities? And of course, in terms of equity, and a lot of those brilliant examples have already, come into the room. A last point, and then just a suggestion and recommendation that I wanted to make, and we can continue to have this conversation. I think we've to, culture is important. Behaviors are important, but these are kind of, non-tangible, if I may say. And therefore, I would be happy to use, really looking at how do you transform. And I know that, my colleague from UNICEF who was here talked about gender transformative programming, because that's what we are discussing currently. We're looking at how do you go beyond this? Because otherwise, I have huge issues sometimes with the language of inclusion and also of mainstreaming, which I often call men screaming, or men streaming, because then you're assuming that there is a certain mainstream in which you're trying to include everybody. And I think what we're learning is that you really need to invert that, and you have to look at transformative solutions that will talk about power, that will talk about representation for sure, that will talk about participation, leadership. And I 200% agree with, with all the panelists who said that we have to look at being, we can't be gender neutral. I 200% agree. And my last point on that is, let's stop saying gender neutrality. I would probably think that it's better to use the word gender responsive, because we fall into a trap the moment we say gender neutral. And I can pick on hazard examples of what that would mean for us, the moment we start saying gender neutral. So I would assume that when we're talking about gender, it of course means largely right now the focus is on women and girls. Of course, it means men and boys in their diversities and all other genders. But we do run the risk, if we use languages of gender neutral, if we start questioning the numbers, because representation is critical. And, when I was listening to our co-panelist who was talking about the legal profession and sectoral design, one size fits all, does not fit, all of that are very well taken. But, I was just thinking in my head that that's where we have to start changing the structures of the sector, because I think the moment we start bringing in meritocracy, the moment we start bringing in that, it tends to be masculine. And you start again evaluating, like she was saying, that they may just say, take 6 months or 7 months off, we'll give you work that is of quote unquote lesser value, because the men are not producing children and they're not staying back at home to take care of them. So just on that note, that we look at moving from that language to be more gender transformative, where, absolutely don't be apologetic, don't buy into these arguments that women don't need to be out there. They need to be out there. We need them in greater numbers. We need them to break the stereotypes, but we also need them to bring in the newer values, as we so lucidly heard from all the panelists. So a big round of applause for everyone, Mithali, and special recognition to you and your team for organizing this conversation. I do want to also stress that, the sisterhood the safe spaces is critical, but it's equally important to strategize. I know sometimes I wonder, why do we even need to speak with the men and boys? They don't have to prove anything. They don't have to do anything like a ROI on why are they there, you know? So, but knowing the reality of patriarchy and that the socialization is such that maybe we can give them a little bit of that room and say it's critical to engage with the men and boys in those conversations, especially on, you know, sexual harassment and violence at the workplace, because behaviors are so normalized. They're so normalized, you know. And just to end on a bit of humor, when I hear people say women have the sixth sense, I always say men have the seventh, eighth, ninth, 10th, 11th. You know what you're doing, you know. So just on that note, huge congratulations to everyone. And I'll stop there because there's so much that one can go on. But, you know, the dialogues must continue. And, you know, from the sisterhood, which is in the room, and I'm including our, you know, or the feminist sisterhood, which is in the room, including the man who's very much here. You can be a feminist too. It's not a bad word. All the best for further discussions. Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Anju. It's so special to have you. And you know, now I'm going to hand over to Gitika, who has been you know, managing the entire show today, to bring in some of our questions, one or two questions, and then you know, we can proceed for, you know, not tea anymore. It's just snacks.
Hi, Lavoni will do that, please. Right, great. Thank you so much, everybody, for sticking around for such a long time. We've got some really great questions. So we've got some people with the questions who are there present in the room today. So I'll just call on them. When I call on you, just ask a question. So the questions are primarily for Mithali and Kiran, but we're more than happy to take any, and me, but we're more than happy to take any comments from the speakers who'd like to pitch in. So first, we've got Tanya Rana from Jindal Global University.
Great. Just extremely overwhelmed to be here. I'm Tanya, and Tejasvi and I represent a student-led community called the Feminist Economics and Policy Initiative at the Jindal Global University. We are both our final semester master students. And so my question is, without a doubt, we need to make workplaces inclusive of women and other gender groups, as we have been discussing. So how can South Asian enterprises, especially you know, small scale industries and startups, navigate the costs of implementing DEI policies? And are there any best practices across the world that they can follow?
So I'll start, and maybe, you know, Kiran and Sujata and Prerna, we are all here, and Pragya, you're here. So, you know, we can all pitch in a little bit, you know, just in a very short. But I think, you know, Tanya, I learned a lot today. I think everybody talked about the cost, because, you know, at the end of the day, that's the bottom line, isn't it? We can all talk, we can have reports. Reports are something I think companies are very happy to spend on as well. But, you know, the real transformation in terms of policies comes from the top. And what we've seen with Zomato's example with period leaves, I think we were discussing period leaves on call the other day. I also have a similar view to Nimisha, that, you know, maybe you don't necessarily need to have a period leave, but just a no questions asked sick leave policy. But either way, you know, the point is that we still need to justify that there is an action being taken for women, but not for men. And that's exactly where I feel Anju's point is so valid, that we have to stop justifying. Even Srimati said the same thing. And both of them are coming from such different spectrums, actually, if you think about it, that, you know, one person is coming from a whole career in corporates, and one comes from, you know, the UN space and dev sector, etc. And they're both saying the same thing, that we have to stop justifying trying to correct the structural biases, because we have to now accept that our workplaces were designed for men, but now are being used by women. So then the design itself needs to change, and that will have a cost. And of course, in terms of justifying, in terms of future labor productivity, etc., these are, of course, what economists are for. We can do those calculations and of course prove that it's all positive. But I think at the end of the day, the commitment is more important than the calculations.
Yeah, I think I'll just add a tiny bit to what Mithali just said. Like, the point that Goda made, end of the day, talent is talent, right? Regardless. So how you really nurture and kind of invest in it is what it needs to be all about at the end of the day.
Yeah, I think I'll just add from a perspective of MSMEs, because you spoke about that particularly. We've seen examples across South Asia, particularly in countries like Vietnam, Cambodia, where women in the supply chain, who are most often at the bottom, have really been able to collectivize and have been made part of the decision making. And that is something we don't really get to see in India as much. There's an inherent fear when women collectivize or anyone collectivizes. I mean, there's this, and essentially the government and the corporates, everyone, there is this inherent fear about, let's not get them to collectivize because it becomes a trade union. It's not about trade union. It's about having women's voices heard. It's about having women represented on those tables where these decisions are being taken. And that is what needs to now kind of happen even here, where again, a large part of our supply chain, if you talk about textile, you talk about some of the other manufacturing units, women are part of the work that they do from home. Right? There's just so much labor that goes into it, but there's very little recognition. So let's recognize, let's help them collectivize, let's help them get onto the table for decision making. And that's what's going to help.
Thank you. Yes, thank you so much. Thank you so much, everybody.
Great. Thank you for that question, Tanya. Next, we have Aishwarya Srinivasan from Kautilya School of Public Policy. Aishwarya, over to you.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. Just quickly putting my question across, considering that D&I roles are on the rise for most countries, and for what I see, the highest per 10,000 employees is in the UK, which is close to 1.93. Now, what I would love for all of you to just shed some light on is how are corporates going to ensure that the work D&I is ideally for does not end up becoming just another data point or a criteria that we need to satisfy as opposed to imbibing the true motive of the policy.
Hi, thanks Aishwarya for this question. I think while mainstreaming is a word that really has narrowed down things, but integration and collectivization and putting it in the center of the dialogue, I think is important. And organizations who have been not talking about tagging gender or just talking about equality or inclusion as a mandate, just to kind of put it a tick box on that regulation are the ones who are probably thinking about, and there must be really few, and it may not be the large organizations, it could be women-led organizations or small enterprises who are working at the community level, who are bringing women at the center of the dialogue. I think that is important that, we have representation at decision making, we have representation in, while we are talking about performances, we are talking about promotions, we are talking about every function of the organization. So it should be a value that we integrate. And that is what I think that, some of us who have been learning through our experience of working within corporates and along with other organizations, I feel is a value that we need to integrate within our systems.
So actually, just adding to that, you said, how will that happen, right? So policies are one thing, and this is something I talked about earlier as well. We need to start building that mindset of inclusion. So the policy can be there. However, when it's, implemented at the ground level, how do people view it? Is there resistance around it? Maybe from men. maybe from other women, like I said, that they might think, don't treat us as a special case. So I think there's a lot of stakeholder alignment that needs to happen, that we are doing this, why we are doing this, and then drive that kind of inclusive behaviors. The second bit is to have more and more role models for women to emulate. So for example, when you talk about diversity, a lot of people would have diverse workforce at the lower levels, but as soon as you get to senior leadership levels, and that happens in HR also, everybody says that HR is full of women, but a lot of HR heads are men, a lot of them are men. So why are there not more women there? What can we do to enable them to get there? And I think when the younger women watch and look at more and more of these role models get there, there is that discussion that probably mentorship they can have from them, that, you know, how did you navigate this life stage of yours? Like, how did you go on maternity, come back, and yet get to this position? So these are the, if we have more and more role models, and I think platforms like these provide that visibility, and it starts with talking about it. Awareness, I think, is the first point of any solution that we're looking. So if you're aware what the problem is, and that is when you can start even thinking of solutions. So I think to generate more awareness, and then to start talking about inclusivity and including that in your decisions. Does that answer your question? Yeah.
I actually had a little something to add to that, because the data point you picked was for UK, right? Now, traditionally, and one of the speakers also made a point about education playing a transformative role, right? So the access to education probably in certain societies has been something which started a lot earlier, right? So every different geography will take a different journey, and that is slowly how it's going to play out. So today, probably DEI initiatives in certain geographies will be more mature, and in certain geographies, they would be at a nascent stage. So that's a journey that we are going to make, and we're all on the path to that. Thank you.
Thanks for the question, Aishwarya. Next, we have Shreya from Hindu College.
Thank you for having us today. So I'll keep my question really short. Do you think formulation of policies and initiatives to eliminate gender biases in the workplace need formation of a separate committee, or it can be included in the existing system that we have? Okay, so do we need to make separate committees that make D&I more possible, or it can happen in the existing system that we have?
Yeah, so very pertinent question, very good question. I think we definitely need subject matter experts on this. Like we said, we think that we understand the extent of the problem and the scope of the problem, but sometimes we don't. We could have limited views. For example, coming from a corporation, it could be like I was in an MNC, the women, profiling was different there. When you come to a startup, it's different there. So I think you definitely need subject matter experts to come in and tell you on how to look at a bigger picture and what the extent and the scope of the issue that we are looking at is there. So and you need people who are constantly thinking about it, because in day-to-day business and constant firefighting, this is something that gets relegated to the background. And so you need to have those people who are constantly talking about this, thinking about this, formulating things, initiatives around this. So in my personal opinion, I think that's important, but I'm sure there'll be people who might have differing opinion.
No, so I'll just add, I totally agree with Nimisha, and I'll add from my experience within Kohler. We have a Women in Network Business Resource Group, which is a group of about 10 women across functions that completely champion this cause. And it's not a tick in the box kind of a group. They have aggressive targets. The entire group has aggressive targets around DEI, women representation, women engagement scores as well in the organization. And the leader of the group, the person who leads it, actually has these targets as a part of her own KRAs as well. So that's where the real difference, the narrative really shifts, the conversation shifts. That's where the seriousness is brought about on the table. And that's where you really get to see a proper drive towards these agendas. So, yeah.
I'm so sorry, I didn't submit a question on the form. Yeah, during the course of this discussion on making workspaces more inclusive for the opposite sex, as women are often called, I think that I have observed one thing is that our concern for things like social mobility, inclusivity, representation, and all these things for women, that we need to make sure for a more gender inclusive workspace remains incomplete if we do not address the issue of intersectionality, right? When we talk about women, we should not believe that all women are same. We have women from minority religions, we have women from lower caste, SC, ST, OBC. So these are women who are far more inferior when it comes to social capital in comparison to their upper caste, peers at a workplace. So in terms of policy formulation, how can we make those workplaces, which are, as a matter of fact, largely dominated by upper caste women, more inclusive for women who come from marginalized sections of society and who are at the intersection of both gender and caste? So that's something that I would really appreciate if someone from the gathering can address. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, sure.
Yes, on that, just would like to, before the last question, we have tons of questions coming in. So thank you everybody for that. We can't answer all of them, but please feel free to reach out to us at nikoreassociates.com. You could also follow us on Facebook, LinkedIn, and Instagram and Twitter. So feel free to drop your questions there. The last question for today will be from Sankalp, who is joining us online from IIFT.
Thank you, ma'am, for a very illuminating discussion. My question is this: what are the remedies available to women who are trying to fight gender pay gaps and discriminatory promotions?
Okay, so I think two very different questions. So I'm just going to try and shift my attention on both of them. So I'll pick the question that you spoke about. So intersectionality, definitely, I think that is a reality, and we cannot assume that all women are equal, because of access and stuff. So definitely, that's the way forward as we go further on this journey. And how can we ensure that this is happening, and how can organization? I think it all comes down to intent and awareness. End of the day, building in that sensitivity, building in that awareness about the various personalities that may exist within your workspace. I think that's the only way we can actually get organizations to bring that change in the way we're proceeding. Yeah.
Thank you.
Anybody wants to add to that?
I would be happy to just add to that. Thank you so much for that question. And I think in addition to the intent, it's really critical. Some of the key elements that were discussed here, and I'd probably look at only 4. Where Mitali started by talking about data. So let's just say you picked up the issue of caste and religion, religious minority. So I think it's really important to really look at any sort of sector, industry, company, organization to really first get a better sense of that, to really know who are the people that you are reaching out to, what their needs are, what their experiences are. And I think then in a very aware manner, I definitely wouldn't want to do like a poof to the policy piece. I think it's critical because in addition to your intent, to behaviors, to mindsets, like I said, those are very non-tangible. But when you create a policy, that means you're laying down the framework and you can hold people accountable for it. So it's important then to then look at, where are you specifically addressing that, whether quote unquote as an equal employer in your hiring processes, or where you're looking at in terms of behaviors and experiences, interpersonal relationships, what are the checks and balances there, or in terms of also the additional needs a certain community might have. So, and then you have to sort of really break that down, and social norms and behaviors that are centered around these issues of intersectionality, addressing them, what are acceptable, not acceptable, respect, rights, all of those then become part of your more non-tangible culture. So somebody used the word intentional, that then has to be backed up by all these actions.
Thank you so much, Andrew, for jumping in on that question. Thank you. And Sankalp's question, would anybody want to address that, or anybody who's present with us virtually? Just doing a quick check. No. All right. Okay, Sankalp, I'll take a stab at that one. So, what you spoke about, when you talk about women trying to, navigate the workplace with promotions and the kind of opportunities, I think that is so. The POSH Act that exists, right? It talks about any of these discriminations originating because of a sexual intent, and that gets covered under POSH. But what you're talking about, if it is opportunities in general which do not originate from something sexual in intent, then that would form under your Workplace Issues Act. It would get addressed over there. So it'll be very important to really see what is the reason or the intent behind an employee or a woman facing certain situations to address that.
And if I could also come in, I'm so tempted
Yes,
at
please,
this point
Anja.
just to, it's been such an amazing discussion. To quickly add for you, Sankalp, that based on our experience, we found, and somebody used the word scratch, when you start scratching up there, you find a lot of many different things underneath. And I think in this case also, that does happen to women. What might seemingly look like non-sexual discrimination, when you start scratching on the surface, then you find that could actually, reveal more sexualized discrimination that the woman might be experiencing. But to respond to your question, there are mechanisms, there are legal compliances, there are laws around this, there are companies are required to follow, of course, where we are looking at, and the fact that women do have access to these redressal mechanisms that might be in place. It's some of what we were discussing today was also that in spite of these, these systems in being placed, women, because of how the workplaces are designed, may not actually be able to access them. Just to give you a data point, I mean, not from, I think increasingly now we're seeing a lot more women coming up and complaining about sexual harassment. But, women who experience domestic violence, for example, we found data that said less than 10% actually go and file a formal complaint. So it's important to understand that women might be experiencing this, but may not really be reaching out to the more formal remedies and remedial measures that might be available to them. And that's where also the significance of what we were discussing today of investing in these safe spaces, investing in those, sort of platforms to be available for women to support. And of course, men are welcome to join. Thanks.
I think we should have done a half-day event. This has extended from a 2-hour event to a half-day event. And I
totally agree with you.
I'm so glad to see that Madhura is still with us. And
everybody.
Yeah, and Akriti just left, I think, 15 minutes ago. So nobody could, resist being part of the conversation.
No, absolutely, Mitali. Hats off to you guys, because this is not a mainstream conversation in general. And you've taken a step to making it one.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much to everyone for your patience. I would now close this formally. Thank you so much for all those who joined us online. I think the hybrid format has clearly worked. A big thanks to my team. I have to, really applaud them. I literally just walked in. They are the ones who did everything. Gitika, with all her lists. She has a list of all the lists that she has for today. Priyal, who's come in from now Pune, but earlier from Kolkata to organize this event. And Varun, who's here, Laboni, who's of course the co-author, and many, many more. Shrishti, Mehek, Charmi, Varya from Network Capital, who's been our support person, completely making sure that we go from Maran to back to HDMI 6 times today. So a big thank you. Mehek is here. Varya, oh, she's coming. Okay, and of course Shivani, who's our social media lead, who has just decided that she'll be using all of this footage for 100 reels, which we'll be putting. So thank you so much to each and every one of you for being here. We invite you to please join us for some snacks and drinks. Please order your coffee, tea, anything that you need at this point in time. We'll just be asking them to take your orders. And please take some snacks. Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank
missing
you,
all that,
Mitali.
Mitali.
All the best.
I
have my tea here.
Madhura, you have to fly down to Delhi. I'm telling you.
I am going to Delhi on 24th.
Then we are meeting. 24th we are meeting.
All right. Bye.
Bye-bye. Take care. Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
Great present.